Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nothing Ever Happens. Wait, no. Sorry, this is the war report. But nothing ever does happen. That part that stands true. And as you can hear right now, I'm joined by not one but two very very fine gentlemen. Of course, we have, as usual, GSP, who is going to give us a rundown on some of the nitty gritty in Ukraine before we get too much into the elephant in the room. And you know him, you love him, and he's back again. Geo
Oh yeah.
joins us once again because
Hey,
such
Gio.
and
You know
such.
why?
Su-
Because Wagner has gone insane.
oh, it's beautiful.
That's
It's
how I
beautiful.
imagine the eagle sounding. Wagner's gone insane.
So true.
Prigozhin's gone insane. That's to quote Homer Simpson, crazy like a fox. Well, we'll see if he's crazy like a fox. That's up for debate. Oh boy. Well, listen, I'm glad to know that me and a few a few autists on Twitter. Huge shout out to my good friend Horace Finkelstein and my good friend 8ELI and our good friend, he's probably watching down on us from the Twitter heavens, our good friend Stalin Frog. They've all been 100% vindicated. Nothing ever happens. Hashtag nothing happening. Never doubt it ever. And I posted this meme of Bret Hart. You know, Bret Hart was the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Nothing happening now, nothing happened then, and nothing ever happening in the future. So there you go. That's amazing. The hot take economy has been so
Yes.
incredible to witness. Automatically, the takes that were rolling from the
Yeah.
lowest of low B to the highest of high, war monitor, news official poster, CNN, this is a coup. But I have to bring attention to one very special poster. Huge fan of the show, by the way. He personally
Oh.
listens to this. Gunther Failing. He had the most I think probably, if you're gonna give out a content Emmy, Gunther Failing should get the content Emmy. He said that there will be, and I shit you not, Wagner, welcome to the resistance. There's going to be an independent Republic of Rostov very soon, according to Gunther Failing. He had a map of Rostov that had a flag of the local oblast. So there's going to be an independent Republic of Rostov, and now Wagner has joined the Wagner. The official accounts on Twitter are going to have a Doggo Abbey now, and welcome to the resistance, Wagner. Gunther Failing, best take out of all of this, besides Richard Hanning, of course. Best. There's going to be an independent Republic of Rostov, and they're going to live the global homogenous liberal dream.
And they'll get
So
admitted into NATO before Ukraine will.
yeah, exactly. Anyways, oh boy,
That's
this
hilarious.
has been amazing. Like, I've never been so vindicated in real time. Like, all of us have never been so vindicated in real time that nothing ever happens, and that's just the nature of hypermodernity. But anyways, Gordon, I don't know how you're going to do the
Mhm.
minutia minute. This is going to be a heroic task. So I'm very curious to see.
So it's going to be very condensed because honestly, there have been very few changes since our last show,
What do
which
you mean
we
the entire
recorded
Russian
on
front line
Monday.
has collapsed?
Oh my god, that's sick. By the way, before you go to minutia minute, okay, this is a take.
Yeah.
This was a take from the Minister of Interior of Ukraine that said that in 24 hours, either
Yes.
Prigozhin succeeds and topples Putin and the war is over, or Prigozhin is going to be arrested and executed. A QAnon meme. So that was a good that take aged like fine wine, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Minister of Interior for Ukraine. I
Well,
forget his name, but yeah.
I think the brunt of the show is going to deal with this whole thing, obviously, right? So thankfully there hasn't been that much going on the front lines. There was even a bit of a ceasefire for a few hours in Zaporozhye. It looked like even the Ukrainians. I don't know the reason for it, right? But it may have been that they suspected that something very fishy was going on, that they didn't trust the report's face value.
They had to go and
That there
check
was
Telegram.
more
That's why they paused.
Nicola, bring up one of the Moscow Telegram channels. It
You know what's
pains me
funny
to do
about-
it.
Oh my god, I remember back when I was on Follow the Rules. Really quick side note. When I was on Follow the Rules, I remember Lev would have these streams on his channel. He'd do like, I would be drawing and he would do his like NFTs back when they were, do you remember NFTs, kids?
Yeah.
He had this little like creature that he was doing, this cartoon. He called it Muskulls, like as skull, like, you know. And then I didn't realize at the time, but he was calling his thing Muskulls. Like, what a bastard! Like, it's
yeah.
I didn't
He's a
even pick
bastard.
up.
I told you the second time we met up that he's a son of a bitch.
No, but that was hilarious. Like, he called it Muskulls. Like, you motherfucker, you're saying Muskulls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clever.
Very clever. But anyway.
I'm just as patriotic as any other full-blooded, half-blooded Russian.
Oh,
just because
boy.
I have a liberal vision doesn't mean.
No. Speaking of which, before you do your the minutia minute, one of the I want to give out. I know I'm dominating the show. I'm very sorry, but the word. Okay, I want to give out the biggest, fattest L to liberal commentary, the liberal commentariat in the West that are pro-Ukrainian. They've taken the biggest, fattest L because they've gone from Wagner's like a terrorist organization, international fascist.
Yes.
They've gone from that to, if Wagner wins, the war is going to be over, and if Prigozhin becomes the head of the Kremlin, topples Putin, that all of a sudden Russia's going to, disintegrate in front of our eyes. It's going to, all the independent republics are going to join NATO, and the war is going to stop. I'm sorry, okay, but if Prigozhin had his way, I'm not going to name that one particular division of the Austrian painter that was operating in Ukraine back in the 40s. But I think that if this supposed coup, allegedly, we don't really know, if it was successful, quote unquote, I don't think that Prigozhin would, wholesome Chungus, I respect the Ukrainians, I respect NATO, let's sign an agreement, let's, have it all. I think the opposite of that would probably happen if Prigozhin would have won. I don't know. I have a feeling.
So you're asking me, like, so what you're telling me right now is the leader, the head of a mercenary outfit, is not a peace-loving negotiator.
People.
I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time.
No, but it's like people that like they'll take critics of Putin, they'll take critics of the Kremlin in Russia, and they don't know that all the libs in Russia have left. They're all in London right now, or in New York, or wherever,
or Georgia,
and that or Georgia, yeah. So it's like, or they're in. I mean, some are in Istanbul. I would imagine.
Or they're in Warsaw.
Tel Aviv. How could I forget Tel Aviv?
Warsaw. No, but like listen. Anyone, okay, my good friend Benjamin Braddock had a great take about Putin. And I said that, really at heart, he's always going to be an ebbish kind of liberal bureaucrat type that was a paper pusher, and that, he always was enthralled with a like sort of a boomer lens, a non-communist boomer Russian lens about the West, in particular Western European culture. And I think that the sort of narrative that and I've said this for years now, that this narrative they run that he's a madman and he's in a bunker and he's like the Austrian painter and he's going insane, that's really not the reality. And I think that people certainly in the State Department, not in the State Department, but certainly in the Pentagon, they know that this narrative is BS and that the media keeps pumping it up, and that actually any opposition to Putin in Russia, now I'm not an ethnic Russian, but I've talked to a lot of people who live in Russia, as all three of us have. And his opposition, either in the communist annals of, those, people that are sort of withering away because a lot of them are boomers, or the people that are kind of aligned with Wagner, uh, they're not liberal reformers that want to end the war. They want quite the opposite. They want to they
Yes.
want total war in Ukraine. That's what they want. They want to go after it all. So it's really, I think, one of the most glaringly low IQ positions of Western media liberal that supports Ukraine, to think that the opposition that Putin is facing organically in Russia, I mean organically as in not some kind of like NGO Navalny opposition, in Russia is very much, you know, they're very much of the position like, Putler, harden your heart, send more missiles. That's their position.
Well, I
And
completely
any sort
understand
of,
what you're getting at, but I think that, and I don't think
yeah,
this is a unique or groundbreaking take, these media talking heads, these people in the State Department, NGOs, whatever, are so arrogant and so confident in their own abilities that they think even in a country like Russia that is as detached to the West as it is, as institutions
yeah,
are relatively safeguarded, I'm not going to say all the way, but compared to certainly anywhere else in Europe or several other parts of the world, but you get the point, that they think, oh yeah, we of course we can put our color revolution candidate in. This is no different than Ukraine or Georgia or whatever
or
else.
Tunisia,
Yeah,
or
and
yeah,
I mean these are the same people who couldn't stage a coup in Belarus properly 3 years ago. But I think that
yeah, and
they're
that's what I
still
mean.
Hmm.
trumped up on their own ability so much that they think they can genuinely push that through.
I think
Well,
that,
part of it is they don't really have any other options.
Yeah, I mean there's
yeah,
also that.
exactly. No, but that's what I mean. Like, there is no any organic liberal support with, like, as opposed to these other nations. Maybe China's similar, although China, you really never know what's going on the ground, every single day. But with Russia's the exception, and I would say because there is no organic liberal support that the NGO industrial complex of the West then latches onto in cordyceps and funds and stages color revolutions. The template hasn't worked in Russia. It may have worked. I mean, certainly after the 90s, obviously, may have worked even during the early 2000s. But nowadays, that sort of liberal organic opposition that is then funded and propagandized and promoted in the West, and then vice versa in subversive media outlets in these nations. That's, I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem as, like, if anything, this war has like drawn the liberals out of Russia. Has done, in an ironic way, the Westernoid media has actually done the job of Putin for him, in that sense of telling them to leave and, withdraw all your money and go away and go to London or, wherever. And so the template isn't working. So now they have to sort of, like, it's just so incredible that like, I've literally seen like these sort of warmonger pro-Ukrainian accounts stop calling Wagner terrorists, and then, like, calling them like freedom fighters or whatever. Then automatically, when Prigozhin signed the agreement, now they're going back to like their mercenary terrorists and whatnot. And I know Michael Tracy has been tweeting about it. He tweeted out the FBI wanted poster for Prigozhin that
Uh,
they may or may not scrub. So yeah,
I also want to touch on another media delusion because this one I found particularly entertaining. So, during the Battle of Bakhmut, the narrative was 50,000 Wagner troops have perished at the hands of the strong and fierce Ukrainian forces. But this same organization that can't take on the Ukrainian forces is also the most hardened mercenary outfit in the world, and however many thousand were going to Moscow could overtake the entire Russian military establishment in the capital and declare a new regime.
yeah, that's another that's another
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, Julius Caesar Prigozhin. So.
Mm.
But I'm curious. So what's happening in the front though? There's no grand
Okay.
Russian collapse, or no?
No. So let me begin the minutia minute with some follow-ups from the last show, and so what has happened since, and some clarification, particularly at on the Zaporozhye front, and that is, in the week past, Odessa was attacked again by Russian missiles. The Russians claim they have knocked out centers of accumulation. This would be for like men and material, basically, for the war effort. On the night of the attack, on the night that Prigozhin decided to have his, I don't know, March for Freedom, as he called it, the Russians launched one of their most massive missile strikes. Every single region in Ukraine was hit by cruise missiles and by geranium drones. Not the Kinjals. The Kinjals were used prior. And in Kiev again. On the Kherson front, there was another boat today that tried to cross. This is a small boat. It's another suicide mission. They've been going on for weeks now. It appears all 3 or 4 of those guys were killed. The one thing to note, though, the Kherson in the Kherson region, and this attack happened in around the Novokakhovka power plant bridge area. Okay, it's very dried out now. It's unlikely tanks can get by there, but I think if you're talking about Humvees and other smaller armed vehicles, they probably could. Now, moving on to the Zaporozhye front, from west to east. So very close to the area where the Dnieper River becomes very wide is this tiny village called Pyaty-Hatki. Pyaty-Hatki has gone back and forth many times. On the last show, I said that, yes, the Russians claim that they used the TOS system, but it doesn't appear like the village was hit with it. So I don't know if that actually happened. So I said, reserve your judgment. What there is, though, this village is kind of more or less straight with a slight kidney shape to it. On its southwestern flank, there is a big forested area that's almost the size of the entire village. What apparently happened was Ukrainian troops went into this area, and that is where the TOS system was used. Now, this is 6 days later. The Russians control this forested area, but the village itself is essentially in the gray zone after switching no less than 6 times. Moving further east to Orekhov, there have been some back and forth there as well, north of the village of Rabotino. So there was an area that the Ukrainians covered, like that they took from the Russians. There's no villages there, but these are farm fields. And then I believe Thursday or Friday, the Russians mounted a counterattack, took the fields from them. And then today, reports are that the Ukrainians have taken those fields back, and a little bit more, like another kilometer in. This is still well a ways from the first line of defense that Surovikin designed. So there's still, all the fighting that I'm talking about is still in the gray zone, and we are now 22 days in the front. Now we move further east on the border of Zaporozhye and southern Donetsk. This is the Vremovka front line. There were a series of villages that were captured. On the last show, I forgot to mention how the Ukrainians wisely moved from a completely different to a different strategy. Because as of now, I think I'm looking at Western and Eastern sources, and it's obvious now that the Ukrainians have lost close to 200 tanks. They've lost 60 fighting vehicles for sure. We know they lost at least 17 Bradleys in the first 36 hours, 13 Leopard 2A6 tanks, Leopard 2A6. So the costs have been tremendous in terms of material. And Simplicus, follow Simplicus for really, really good analysis on Substack. And he said something that was really eye-opening, right? If this war is a war that's constantly monitored, whether by drones high-flying drones, low-flying drones, so they get a very granular picture of what they're looking at, plus satellites, right? Any area that has like a concentration of men and material, right, is going to raise suspicion. The interesting thing is the initial attacks that the Ukrainians began mounting on June the 4th to June the 6th. It wasn't until June the 2nd that they actually got their uniforms. And the reason for that is they didn't want to get hit deep behind enemy lines. Now, we know that that still happens because the Russians lost a major general, and the Ukrainians, as I said last week, lost, I believe, 2 colonels, 2 lieutenants, and one other guy that might have been a colonel or a major. So this is something that you really have to think about, right? And the Ukrainians then began to deploy a different form of attack, roughly between, let's say, 8 to 11 days after the initial attack. So sometime around mid-June, and they began capturing a series of small villages. In doing so, they had a reconnaissance force. This is according to history legend. Now, I have not heard anybody else make this claim except him, but this reconnaissance force was able to give details to the Ukrainian forces that took out 5 tracked mobile Russian artillery pieces. I believe they fire like the 152 mils, right? So that's a very interesting thing. And so Simplicus is basically, what he's getting at is this. The only way you can fight a war like this out in the open is by accumulation of forces, constantly accumulating and spreading at the same time and not getting caught, because that's how strong the surveillance is, right? The Ukrainians are still losing. I just saw videos today from today and from yesterday. That's when the videos were being made or published. And I brought up Makarovka because that was the village that went back and forth between the Russians and the Ukrainians in the first 2 weeks, like no less than 4 times. And the Russians have now re-entered that area. And they're just on the outskirts, and you saw a T-80 that took out 2 armored vehicles. These are big. These are much bigger than a Humvee. They're much stronger. They're not Bradleys, right? Because I can tell the difference. They're not a Bradley. They don't have that sloped front. It's more like an armored truck with a powerful machine gun bay with shields around it at the top. And really, that's about it. The other notable areas of the conflict are around Avdiivka. The Russians made progress this week around north of Marinka. South of Marinka towards Ugledar. But they've been relatively small, just as small, if not smaller than like the gains the Ukrainians have been making. And the Ukrainians now finally pushed the Russians outside of the canal in the southern crumple zone of Bakhmut, but they're not in Bakhmut. They have not taken Klishayevka or any of that, but the crumple zones have crumpled, I would say, significantly. Like they've lost 25 to 30% of their mass that they had from their height back in, let's say, April or early May. The other area of active fighting right now is in the Kremenaya, Kupiansk, Liman direction, and the Russians did take a small village today towards Krasny Liman. Let me see if I can find the name of it. I believe it starts with an M. Yes. No. I'm not going to find it now. This is a small village, basically. It's about the same size as the villages yes, here it is. Sinkovka. It's in the Kupiansk direction. Now, the Russians did cross the Zherbets River in this area. Sorry, the Oskal River. And they've had a toehold in there now for several weeks. I think it can be said that they are focusing on taking Liman back. Even that woman, I believe her name is Anya Mylar or Anya Malyar. She mentioned yesterday that the Russians are preparing something significant in this area on the border of Lugansk and Kharkov. I'm talking about the oblasts, not the cities, right? This is an area like directly between them. More shelling in Donetsk. A young man was killed. In the Belgorod region, 2 Ukrainian teenagers went with AK-47s and crossed into Russia. They killed an elderly civilian and a policeman, and then the Russian army killed them. So there's a, so that's it basically for the front lines. They didn't collapse as many had hoped. I did think of one thing, I thought the Russians would have not fought so tenaciously just to keep Ukraine in the gray zone. And maybe the reason for it, and this is, I think, where we get into Prigozhin, is because Prigozhin started saying all kinds of crazy things before he did this. Right now, if you go back and you look at the video that he gave with that war gonzo guy, right? The war gonzo guy, this was in February, he says to him, maybe one of the reasons you're not getting the ammo is Moscow kind of thinks you're going to march on Moscow. And he says, what? And he says, well, they think you have too much autonomy and that you would consider marching in Moscow. And he says something like, it's very flippant. He says, oh, I haven't thought about that. He doesn't say I would never do it. He says, oh, I haven't thought about that yet. And he looks a little bit incredulous when he says it. But the other really crazy things that he was doing was he began spreading rumors. And like the thing with him that we've had to learn is, he's 90% BS and 10% truth, right? Like you can, like, I don't know what people's opinion about the ammo shortages are, whether they were real or not. You could argue, well, more troops entered the battle of the Russian side, so they're probably going to need more ammo. That's a possibility. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. There was obviously there were problems between him and high command. Of course, with Gerasimov and Shoigu. But so the thing he started saying was the front lines are breaking. Tokmak is surrounded. Tokmak is like on the second line of defense. Like Ukrainians haven't even reached the first line of defense, and it's significantly further down. This is roughly in the area south of Orekhov. Then there were videos of guys who said that they were Russian servicemen and saying, we're on the side of Prigozhin, right? Like, I'm not trying to take away how much of a following he has. He does. Those guys who won in Bakhmut are heroes. There's no question. And it was very costly, even by his own admission. He said, for every for every 5 Ukrainians killed, there were 2 to 3 Russians or Wagnerites who were killed. So not like a really great
KD ratio.
Yeah. But they did have more air power. They had more capable air power as of the second half of April, not from last year, because at that point, Ukraine still had a lot of S-300 systems, but it was Surovikin who basically went after the energy infrastructure. But what that would do is it would light up for the Russians where the S-300 systems were. And that is what they began doing in the winter and in the spring. And then with the so-called Discord leaks, we found out that at the beginning of May, Ukraine would be in a severe problem with lack of ammunition for S-300 systems and S-300 systems themselves. And that is what happened. This is what allowed the Air Force to participate better in Bakhmut. The other is, of course, the Ukrainians just began blowing up buildings. sometimes with their own men in them, not just Wagnerites. So it became much more brutal than Solidar. And of course, it's a easier place to defend than Solidar was. In any case, so he's making these kinds of, crazy statements, right? But what was discussed just before? Like, you go back a week before this, right? And what was discussed was like, Wagner's going to be absorbed into the Russian military. There's not going to be a Wagner in Ukraine anymore, and he didn't like it. The other thing that happened about a week ago is, of course, he had Crazy Mo, Lindsey Graham, and Blumenthal beginning to panic and saying, oh, because they're repeating basically what Budanov and Zelensky were saying and continue to say, which is the Russians are going to blow up the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And if that happens, and one whiff of that radioactivity goes over past the border of Ukraine, like let's say in I don't know, Romania or Poland, that's it. Article 5. Like, okay, so that's a act of desperation, right? That's a desperate thing to say. That means like your war is not going well. Head of the IAEA, who was there, in fact, for the first time, because these guys go there and they tell you, we don't know who's shelling this place, blah blah blah. But curiously, for the first time, they said the Russians have not mined this place and they're not shelling it. So deductively, you'd have to figure out who is shelling it is not the Russians, and who has planted bombs there, because there are no bombs planted there. It's not the Russians, right? So consider this act of desperation, and I would think like maybe the best way to understand what Prigozhin is or was, because a lot of who he is a media figure, right? So if you go with the idea that maybe this was all a psyop, or this was a kind of coup that was prematurely nicked in the bud, I would go with either of those scenarios, because I think you cannot think that Moscow would not be keeping tabs on this guy in his interview with War Gonzo, the more younger looking guy with the red beard. So remember, he went into Rostov, like Moscow told, and the governor in that area were told, let them through, don't get in the way. I will say this, before the show started, I brought up Joaquin Flores, and I told you guys off air, like my brother and I were up late Friday night. The Bratia of World War Now started a stream, and so I was listening to what they were saying and contributing in the chat. Of course, everybody in the house was asleep, including my little nephew. So there's no way I could join. But thank you guys for asking. And my brother and I spoke afterwards, and my brother was pretty adamant. There's something that makes no sense about this. Like, he's talking smack, he's talking BS, he's talking of a scenario that if that scenario had taken place, which is the first line of defense has crumbled. And the lines are breaking up. It's Kherson all over again. It's falling apart. They're hiding the bodies in Rostov-on-Don. Like, you wouldn't make that kind of a statement unless it's like, let's say, an elaborate psyop, or unless he's been bought out. He has aspirations, and I said this back in April, that he has political aspirations. He wants something more than his role in Wagner now. And so this didn't make sense. And so the thing about Joaquin Flores is he was never convinced by this. He stuck to it all the way. He never changed his mind that this was a psyop of some kind. And in his mind, you know, if a plane or a helicopter go down, or if a Jeep is blown up, it doesn't mean it's not a psyop. That isn't proof that it's not one, right? It's proof that you know, no psyop goes perfectly. So in his mind, he never changed his stance on it. I woke up in the morning and I'm seeing more and more, you know, crazy reports. I'm talking with my brother, trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe it's more serious. My brother never flinches, never changes his mind. I stayed up very late. I wanted to hear what Flores had to say, because, you know, he's in Belgrade, he's in Serbia, right? So there's a 6-hour difference. But I fell asleep. I was exhausted. And also, as you both know, I have like a problem with arthritis, so it drains me. So
The
anyway,
man is on death's door. It's a miracle that he's even doing the show right now.
But he has a replacement.
Yes, I do.
He has a replacement.
Yes, I do.
My brother.
Perfect.
Yes, I do.
Get him in here.
Absolutely
right now.
heartless, cold-blooded.
Look, I
So
have a great deal of affection for you, but the show must go on. I have to look out for the best interest of the collective here. Okay,
Wow.
so if one must be put out to pasture, I will do it mercifully, but I will still do it.
Wow. You know, I feel close to Putin right now. It's a knife in the back.
Do you think
So-
that? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So here's what Joaquin Flores predicted, and I'll give you the reasons why he came to this prediction. He has for some a very intuitive, for others maybe elaborate idea, but nonetheless, he never changed his mind, and he said, just watch. All of this will stop. Prigozhin will not be charged with anything. Neither will Wagner. And the whole thing will fizzle out. And in less than 24 hours, it fizzled out. Right? The thing is, like, I always pay attention to the people who have the best predictors. It doesn't mean you have to buy their reasons for their predictions, right? But they have the best predictors. And I found Joaquin Flores, like spring of 2014, you know, when he would show up on that YouTube channel with, you know, natural homeopathic herbal medicine stuff. They had like a small segment with Tim Kelly, and he would go on the show and talk about stuff, you know, with Tim Kelly and that guy Mark, who came up with the magazine Voice of the East or something like that. This is when Tim Kelly and Jay Dyer were still friends. So, like, that's how far back I'm aware of these people. Mark Hannon or Mark, I wrote Mark. So, anyhow, that is what he said. Now, the reasons for it are this. Remember, I brought up that there's all this, the NATO summit is coming up. The conclusion to the front, right? Because remember, the front was going to be spectacular. Zelensky said, you will feel it when it happens. Graham Lindsay was there the day it was launched. They told him their plans. This is when he said, you know, best investment ever, more Russians dying, right? So, and what happened after 2 weeks of that, right? They started to lose their nerve. Zaporozhye. We have to do something. Sky News had a retired general who said, like, we have to send in planes. Like, we can't even wait for them to train them. But the situation is dire, and it is dire, right? Because except for what what happened because of Prigozhin, the Russians have not lost one aircraft in 22 days due to the Ukrainians attacking, right? And on the last show, I explained how and why these helicopters are so effective, because they have these missile jamming systems. They don't just have the flares. And now they've got shoot and forget missiles that they received at the end of October 2022. So things are very different than when they first invaded. And that's also why Ukraine must use the slow manpower accumulation method, where they take troops upon troops that, one on foot after being transported part of the way with armored vehicles. So just to get back to Flores, what Flores is basically saying, and I'm sorry I'm hogging all of this. So what Flores basically explained is Russia understood that NATO needed an off-ramp of this narrative, that the counteroffensive is failing. And because Russia does not want NATO and America to intervene or to escalate, right? By giving them hope that Russia could fall at any moment, that permanently changes the narrative. The focus on the counteroffensive will now shift. Now there will be speculation on what it will take to have another Prigozhin, right? Is there a possibility it could happen again? They think 1917 is repeatable, but life in Russia is too good for 1917 to repeat. It's just too good.
Yeah, no, there's no motivation at all. And
yeah,
what were they thinking that Prigozhin, that Wagner was so attenuated in Bakhmut Achimorsk, let's even Bakhmut, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's be respectful. But what is their thinking that this happened because Prigozhin couldn't take his men getting slaughtered in Bakhmut, even though they won? I don't understand. What is the Western media take
I think
on this whole thing?
You go ahead first, Constantine. You answer that. But I've got my own take. But
there's.
Do you want me to go first?
I don't even know where to begin with this, because there's so much, just sheer nonsense that I think. Look, you've been on a roll. Your last 15, 20 minutes or so have been impeccable. Some of the best content you've ever done on the show. I'm saying that completely serious, and I want to hear you bring that to its conclusion first before I say anything.
Oh, okay. So this gives them an elegant off ramp, right? Just like the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's an elegant off-ramp. We find out decades later that the Americans removed the nuclear missile system that they put in Turkey. But on the face of it, it was just those damn Russians who were forced to remove their possible nuclear installations in Cuba. Cuba could exist as long as America had Guantanamo Bay, right? That was the deal that was made, right? So this is kind of a similar elegant off-ramp. Now you also hear that there's more talk about the Zaporozhye plant, because it doesn't at the moment because there are still some who are very invested in the counteroffensive, and they're still panicking that they're not going to show enough significant achievement before July the 11th, because that is when the NATO meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania, is going to take place, right?
Also,
curiously, today, yes. Now, curiously, it was either today or yesterday. I read it today, so it might have happened yesterday. There was another meeting of decolonizing Russia. This is a group of EU members, EU politicians who meet. They had one, I believe, in Germany or France already, and now they're having one in Finland, right? And they're discussing how to divide Russia, right? How it can be possible. What Prigozhin did is for them like a first possible step. So that heightens their attraction around this particular narrative, right? and it lays off pressure on the Russians, right? Now, what else was mentioned a week ago? Putin said that there are 150 troops that are trained now that will shortly, at the end of June, will go in, and on top of that, they have 112, and they have 52,000 volunteers, and they will also enter at the end of June. And this is my suspicion is that Anya Malyar, that's what she is reacting to, right? Because remember, for many shows I've been saying there is word of a heavy concentration of T-90 tanks in the northern part of Lugansk region, or the part adjacent to it in the older Russian territory, right? So that was Joaquin Flores's idea, that they needed to get off on this this type of escalation, and by feign, because you have to ask yourself, right? Like where would Wagner get their ammo from if they mounted a serious attack? More than half of Wagner did not join this, right? Then you have then you have that guy Utkin. You know who Utkin is? He's the guy who actually created Wagner. He's the guy with the thunderbolts tattooed to his neck from, mid-century Germany inspiration.
Oh God, yeah. He's a big
You know
fan
who
of
I'm
Austrian
talking about.
landscape painting. Yeah.
Yeah, he really is. He loves the cityscapes. No people though. Anyhow, you know the joke I did in the bookstore many years ago when Trump got elected.
Oh God, I think I remembered. What was it?
You remember this? You remember, like, so I go into the bookstore, and my friend is there with me, and he introduces me to the guy who works behind the bookstore. It's a used bookstore, and oh, what did you do? What did you study? Oh, I said, oh, I went to art college, but I wasn't appreciated. I failed. They said my charming my antiquated paintings of Vienna had a kind of brutalist, almost alien-like quality. It lacked a certain humanity. There weren't even any people in them. So
Oh boy.
the
Oh,
guy I
God.
was talking to is half Austrian. he was dying. Oh my God. He's not a shitlib, but the place is very shitlib. And they're like, it's flying over their heads, dude. Like, oh, anyways, it was a lot of fun. But I digress. So I mean, I think I've said it'll probably more things will occur to me later on, but that's Joaquin Flores's idea. That's what he thought. I think you can also make the case that Prigozhin was after something, but Prigozhin has to know there is no way for him unless the majority of the military joins his side. And I know that when he was in Rostov, it appeared that that was a distinct possibility. But how is it possible that one call on the phone gets this guy to quit? Like, and of course they made it look like he was closer to Moscow than he really was, but he was past Voronezh. So, yeah, I mean, he was not that far away. He was closer to Moscow than he was to Lugansk city, that's for sure. So I don't know. I Like I say, I always respect people that can make the call. They must stick to the call. They never waver. And I'm just saying that Joaquin Flores has made a lot of calls like this over the years, and I'm impressed by him.
Well, I have a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
Could this be a Montreal screwjob type event? But like
I don't know what a Montreal.
Okay, think of it this way, okay? It was kayfabe before. But I had a tweet. My good friend Momo, who is also a wrestling fan, said "beautiful, clean Cole." Okay, so I had this tweet for those of you who know wrestling. Okay, Prigozhin is Bret Hart. Putin is obviously Vince McMahon. Lukashenko is Earl Hebner, the referee, and Shoigu is Shawn Michaels. Okay. So in other words, was this a psyop? Was this all kayfabe? But then at the last moment, basically to Putin and the Kremlin and Shoigu, this was a shoot. It's real, in a way to get rid of Prigozhin. But Prigozhin thought it was a work, and now he's exiled to Belarus. I'm totally pulling this out of my ass, by the way, because I'm a fucking, I'm terminally like wrestling brain. But like, I was talking about. It's funny because Academic Agent, he added me. He's like, you need an education what wrestling is, what kayfabe is, and he added Giant Geo. He's like, talk to Giant, talk to Geo.
I saw that. I saw that.
I'm like, maybe it's all kayfabe, maybe it's all a work. Like, but Prigozhin thought it was a work, but to the Kremlin it was a shoot. But then by the time he got into it, he had to commit, so he worked himself into a shoot, brother. To quote Hulk Hogan, only stupid marks don't know when a shoot is a work and a work is a shoot. Okay, so in other words, Prigozhin, being one of the biggest marks for himself, basically worked himself into a shoot. Okay, if you understand that. So, and I hope Academic Agent, I'm gonna send him that. I'm gonna clip this and I'm gonna send Academic Agent this. Oh, but in other words, I think that the theory that I have is that maybe, it was only Prigozhin thought it was a real work. That maybe they're doing this to sort of get rid of him and get rid of the other sort of dissident heads of Wagner. And I don't know. I mean, that could be a possibility. Or it could just be that they're doing this thing with Lukashenko because they needed someone who is like in their sphere of influence, but is like somewhat impartial. And it's like this worked. Like, imagine if the Montreal screwjob, the conspiracy was correct that, like, Bret Hart knew that he was going to get quote unquote screwed by Vince McMahon by the fast count. So maybe this whole thing has been orchestrated where Lukashenko is sufficiently away from the machinations of the inner workings of the Kremlin, and so he could be like the peace broker, and being exiled to Belarus, that's maybe just like, I don't know, maybe that's just kayfabe, and that maybe Prigozhin can come back, or, well, I mean, he'll never be the head of Wagner ever again. But I don't know. I mean, the fact that like the majority of Wagner didn't go along with it really tells me something. It tells the world something.
Well, I mean, I think Putin is not happy with both Shoigu and Prigozhin.
Oh,
and I think Putin has shown an inordinate amount of patience with Prigozhin.
Yeah.
And, maybe that got to Prigozhin. Like, I don't doubt that maybe Prigozhin, he saw just how many of his fighters died in Bakhmut.
Yeah.
I've never been able to make up my mind how many
many men have been attenuated in Wagner by Bakhmut? We don't really know, do we?
He divides it into like prisoners and other fighters, and killed in action, the two together are like 10 to 12,000, if I remember correctly. I mean, it's Prigozhin saying this, right? I don't know, like, like I say on this show, you never really know what the actual count is, right? You just know that it's very horrific and very, he's unhappy.
The Russian military, they keep records, though. That's the thing. Like, like,
yeah, I mean, if you look
it's not a private, like, from my understanding, really quickly, like, when Prigozhin, you were saying he was pissed off that they wanted to divide Wagner, like, absorb them. I thought the plan was always going to be that essentially Wagner was going to be like the equivalent of the French Foreign Legion, but Russian, and that Prigozhin would eventually no.
Prigozhin reached the end of the line after Bakhmut. Remember, he said crazy things.
Yeah,
I'm losing Bakhmut. I can't hold on. Then 4 days before he takes Bakhmut, I'm leaving. I don't know who's going to take it. Kadyrov said, I'll take it. I'll defend Bakhmut. And then before Kadyrov shows up, Prigozhin takes Bakhmut, right? So it's like, I just he's for whatever reasons he's not a guy you can fully trust on face value, like, and he's the author of his own skepticism that floats about him. So yeah, that's all I can say.
Well, he said. I think the craziest thing he said. I mean, I know you were going to get to it, but what about like the actual special military operation? That to me is like bonkers what he said, if it's true. I mean, this is the Moscow Times reporting it, but he said something to the effect that the SMO, the invasion of Ukraine, didn't need to happen. That actually this was engineered. This was like a kayfabe engineering
by the oligarchs.
Yeah, by oligarchs plus Shoigu and Gerasimov, and they've been tricking Putin this whole time. This is like this literally is some video game tier dialogue right now. Like, this is crazy. This is like a spy thriller novel.
Yeah.
Ian Fleming could write this. Wait, who wrote?
Like, Wagner has profits, but they depend on Russia.
Fleming.
Like
yeah, Fleming. No, but you were saying, Gordon? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you said it, because
that's an insane thing to say for a.
It's an insane thing to say. Do you remember that time you came on the show in early May and we read Prigozhin's letter?
Yes.
Remember in the start of the letter, he said something to the effect, "You could stop, this offensive right now." He ends it with a fair fight, but in order to defend his position about a fair fight, Russia deserves a fair fight. He outlines all the traitors and everything. But he says, we don't have to take Ukraine. We don't have to do all of this. We could just freeze it right now, right? I just thought that was a very odd thing for him to say, as a counterpoint to why actually they should go on. It was, in retrospect, it seems almost like an admission and a preparation for the things he said recently.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very weird. I think most people are, and I am too. I'm just amazed at this. If you I never once believed that he was going to mount a successful takeover of Moscow. I'll say that, okay? Even though it was Utkin who was leading the charge with, one source said 170 vehicles, another said 400 vehicles. Like, you're not like, if you include all three major rings, like, Moscow is like, it's 12 million people. Like, you're not going to take it. Right, you're not like.
What is this, like, in 1991?
No one flipped to his side. There wasn't a region in Russia that said, we recognize Prigozhin.
Oh no, everyone who was anyone.
We don't recognize either.
Everyone who was
nothing happened.
Exactly, nothing happened. Everyone who was anyone immediately denounced him, whether that be, of course, Putin, the top of the Russian governments, of the cabinet officials, Shoigu, all those people, any of the governors of the regions, the governor of Rostov denounced him, even the governors of Donetsk and Luhansk also denounced him. So there was no popular support for this. And you brought up the point about, again, trying to take however many men were in this convoy to stage a coup in Moscow and just completely take over. Just to put in perspective, to call back to, what was it, the August 90 or 91 coup. Again, years irrelevant for that.
Where they're like,
even with
rushing, like, different forces are like rushing to the Kremlin to take over.
Exactly. Even with the top brass of the Soviet military at that point, even though the Soviet Union had suffered a marked decline in the past several decades by that point, they were not able to overtake the Russian government. They were not able to overthrow Gorbachev. Now, there was a large popular uprising against them. Let's get that straight. But even with all the military power they had, they were not able to subdue the country and take power from Gorbachev and his underlings. So the idea that Prigozhin was ever going to take power, I think, was delusional from the start. Now, I will say, when I first saw this, I thought this was just complete hoax. This is not happening. Then it went on, there was
Yeah.
more evidence towards it. I figured there was an element of song and dance there, but as time went on, ultimately it's going to be a very baseline take. What I believe happened in all of this was Prigozhin was doing his showmanship, of course. I mean, the man's a bullshit artist. Fundamentally, it's and I'm not even saying that as a value judgment. I'm saying that just objectively. The man speaks in
Yes.
pure hyperbole, no matter what he's discussing. And I think it was one of his stunts that, frankly, just went too far. Of course, there are self-serving gains. I think anyone denying that he had it has intentions to either have a political career or something greater than just the public face of the Wagner group. I think they're denying reality in that case. So I think that was part of that. Perhaps he thought he could bend the Russian government into accelerating the war effort, perhaps handing over more power to Wagner or Prigozhin in particular, or himself in particular, that being Prigozhin, and fundamentally trying to influence the course of the war. Of course, there's the theory that this was a backdoor deal where Prigozhin has his little quote-unquote march of justice, in which case Putin has to make concessions, sacks several of the generals, sacks Shoigu, all of that, in order to appease the demands of Wagner and their complaints about the way the war has been conducted. Again, I think that's something we'll have to wait to see what happens in the following days, how Russia restructures any sort of command, if it even does, if Russia brings on new people into the command, or if it fundamentally changes the strategy of the war. We could see something like that. But the newest schizo take, and I'm calling it a schizo take until further notice, that I have seen is with the exile of Prigozhin to Belarus. You now have actually both sides, both the Western media and the people who have, let's just say, a rose-colored vision about Russia. Now, I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, because I mean, look, you guys clearly know the bias of this show. It's been what, a year and a half since this war started, maybe okay, just shy of, and clearly we've come down on a certain side of this war. I don't even think I need to say any more about that. But admittedly, there are people with rose-tinted glasses viewing the way Russia's conducting this war. Oh, Russia's winning. They're pounding the Ukrainians. I mean, look, they are winning. The Ukrainians are suffering great losses, but it hasn't been the
Yes.
one-sided affair that a lot of pro-Russia people would
No,
like you to
it's a
believe.
legitimate. It's a
It-
legitimate full-scale
yes.
20th century style war.
Yes,
You're gonna
and
have
once again, I
huge
attribute that to the
casualties.
fact that it is Russia fighting an army backed by the entirety of NATO. These men have been trained by NATO for 8 years. They are getting a wealth of Western supplies. It is the closest thing that we've gotten so far to another world war. And of course, there's a lot of danger.
Yeah, we
for
take
things.
nothing away from the
Yeah.
AFU. I mean, they've been fighting with all their hearts. You know, you can't. Yeah,
I
gotta
mean,
give them-
America's donated more tanks to Ukraine, or like NATO, let me say, has donated more tanks to Ukraine in 14 months, 13 months than Russia did in the entirety of all the Vietnam Wars from the mid 50s to 1975. Just to put it into perspective.
oh, I didn't realize it was that drastic of a.
were those tanks coming from Russia, or were they coming mostly from China in Vietnam?
I would think Russia.
Yeah, because that's right. Because the Chinese industrial base was. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and then of course, even after.
Well, the Chinese never
Vietnam
liked
War,
the Vietnamese, so
yeah,
that's
that gets into the complex relationship between the Chinese and the Vietnamese, where the point where when the Soviet Union and China split into separate poles during the Cold War, Vietnam particularly fell on the side of Russia, whereas Cambodia fell on the side of China, which is why you had that short
Yeah.
border war between them. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s. But that's completely aside the point here. But point being is, a lot of people have rose-tinted vision about Russia, and of course there's the Western media, fear-mongers and war-mongers, and just the assortment of the finest and brightest people that you can imagine in all of this.
enough retardation
So-
to shake a stick at up there. Yeah.
That's a very good way of putting it. This is why I bring you on the show. But with all of that, with that being said, the new take is that another front on Kiev is going to open from Belarus, despite the fact that Prigozhin is being sent away to
Oh,
Belarus.
God.
pretty much as a quote-unquote punishment, even though at this point with the way things are going, I would pay to be exiled to Belarus personally. If anyone's listening, look, if the feds are listening, that's hyperbole. If Lukashenko and his boys are listening, you know how to get in touch with me. Hypothetically, of course, but I'm getting.
Oh, Constantine, do you remember?
Go ahead.
Do you remember when we were covering the Lukashenko coup
Like
back in
2020,
August
yeah,
2020?
yeah, distinctly,
Yeah.
yes.
Now I don't know if it was. I can't remember whether it was like April of the next year, or it was April leading to August 2020 or August 2020. But do you remember those arrests that happened at that like 5-story dome?
Yes, yes, I do.
Those little rises, and they arrested like 32 members that first they were Ukrainian, then they were Russian, and it turns out they were Wagner.
Yeah, I remember. I
So
think that
there's
was
something
in
mysterious
that was in
about
April
that.
2020 because that is when
Yes.
there appeared to be a rift between Russia and Belarus, even spearheaded by Lukashenko at that point. In which case, that led to him getting a bit softer with the West. Of course, he's played this game for years, ever since he's been in power. He'll lean on the West, he'll lean on Europe, and of course, when he leans on Europe, he gets repaid with the color revolution in his own backyard in August 2020. August 2020, I mean, that was also the time that Lebanese port exploded. Very pivotal month, I think a lot of people have forgotten about. But I'm getting, yeah, again, there's a lot of.
Well, everyone's distracted with the events of what happened in January that year.
Yeah,
up until
Convid.
August, so yeah. And that too.
Yeah, yeah. But.
Did we lose him?
No, I'm just. I think if you're having connection problems, those are probably on your end. But. With all of that being said, again, the new schizo take is a front on Belarus. They've been talking about this since the beginning of the war, and it still has yet to happen. And I don't know. Maybe Prigozhin is there as a contingency in case Poland gets involved. And frankly, to return to the question of Poland and the Baltic states and the NATO summit in Vilnius, I think with what we just saw in Russia, whether it was a psyop, whether it was a legitimate attempt at a coup, put all of that aside. That's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make here. What we saw here was a fundamental shift about the narrative in Russia, about power structure in Russia. Even if things are all stable now, which I relatively accept is the case, that things have been completely stabilized, that this is something that is mostly an open and shut case. But the outside world, especially the Western states, especially Poland and the Baltic states, will take every opportunity they can to run with how unhinged and unstable Russia is and why we need a more concerted effort against them, in which case we return to a possible Polish intervention into this war being accelerated as a consequence of quote-unquote unstable and dangerous situation in Russia. I think that's a way they could spin this in the coming days. That is, if they continue to follow with this narrative, this could be something they sweep under the rug, say, forget about it, nothing happened there, Wagner Group, they're they're Putin's evil mercenaries again, however they want to spin that. But potentially, once again, they can spin this as a blow against Russia's credibility, saying it's an unstable and dangerous situation, which is why we need further involvement and further entrenchment in order to contain the situation, because Russia is the world's largest nuclear power. In which case, yeah, exactly, that opens the door for, in particular in Ukraine, a Polish intervention to galvanize the front lines, or maybe even a blockade of Kaliningrad if things get that desperate. But we're looking at a whole new world of possibilities that they can completely draw off of everything that just happened here. And I think at the end of the day, no matter what the reasoning it was, no matter what the initial cause was, what we need to look at now, I think it's important to look at all this in retrospect, don't get me wrong, I think what we're doing right now is very necessary, but I think what's equally as necessary and will become more necessary in the coming days and weeks is to look at how this will be spun on both sides, particularly the West, who is looking for any reason to escalate this conflict.
Well, there's can you hear me, Goran?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, yeah. The other schizo, I don't know if this is a schizo take, but we have to bring up this possibility. I can't personally see this happening. I don't think that this much slack. They're obviously probably monitoring him, especially now.
Yes.
The take that actually Prigozhin's like a secret double agent of the West, is like another take I've been seeing by like
Yep.
like Ukrainian accounts and I
Even
believe
Scott Ritter thinks he is.
Oh, really? Eh?
Yeah. Oh, Scott Ritter thinks he's totally because remember Medvedev said that he has been funded by the the CIA and MI6. Martyanov has also said the same thing. In fact, his latest video, he cited what Medvedev said. Now, like you're probably going to imply, this is just what they're saying.
Yes.
Like we don't know for sure. But that's a narrative that they're running.
Yeah, like okay, Scott Ritter, he has some good takes, but he can be a bit much. You know what I mean? But he's on the level. I mean, people have criticized him for a number of different reasons that I not gonna get into. But let's just say that a lot of the commentary, like on either side, you have to take with a grain of salt. Not saying that Scott Ritter's wrong. A person, actually, I'll give him a shout out, who has been quite interesting in terms of his takes. If you follow Semyagog, he's been he's had a lot of
his last stream.
Yeah, he's had a lot of very interesting takes. And I know like we got this thing like, he calls me a Vatnik and all that. But no, Semyagog, I think like he's been pointing out that not to agree with this take that Prigozhin's like the secret double agent of the West, but there's a lot of inconsistencies here. There's quite a few, like even just mentioning how there were even Wagner troops that were arrested back in 2020 in Belarus. Like there's a lot of very fishy things going on.
Because Wagner is kind of like, it is a place where Russia's, let's say, neo-Nazis go that don't go to the side of Ukraine.
And if they're not Nazis, then they're like far right nationalists of Russia.
They're far right. They're
the ones that haven't went to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So what were you saying about that, Corin? Like
about what?
Well, the right wing
influence
of Wagner. Yeah. Oh yeah. Semyagog.
Yeah. The reason he calls you a Vatnik is because I secretly know that Semyagog is part Turkish. I'm joking.
No,
No, I know he's not. I'm teasing him. I know.
It's just a joke. It's just a joke.
Him and I had a YouTube comments disagreement several years ago, but no, I watch his show and stuff, and yeah.
He's pretty. What is he? He's like
his takes are quite good.
Oh yeah. No, but he was pointing out that like there's a huge like everything about like I think we should just like for a brief moment step back and say how absolutely crazy like the last 24 hours has been.
They really have been.
And like I pointed out on a YouTube short like people giving their hot takes, like we really do not know the internal, like as much as people like to think that the optics and the information war has been won over Russia, we really don't even know what's going on. I know that Putin had the speech about denouncing him as a traitor and so forth, but forgive me if I think I maybe don't detect as much fire and brimstone in his voice as his other speeches, such as Empire of Lies.
Mm-hmm. So my brother thought he was making a hammed effort.
Yes. And maybe because he has some partial respect for Prigozhin still. Or maybe, I mean, like Prigozhin is either an agent of the West or he's an agent of Putin and this is all kayfabe. Like, I personally am very like on the fence with all of this. But I'm curious to see what you two think of this. Like, and so you were mentioning about like the far right in Wagner and this thesis that they're controlled by the West or whatever.
Right. There's a young guy, I'm gonna botch his name because I can't remember it now. He's one of the founders of Rusich, and Rusich is like a subgroup of Wagner. His claim to fame when he was a teenager is he led, like I remember when this footage was first published. Everybody knows about the Donetsk airport fight, but there was a Lugansk airport fight as well. And I think his last name, if I'm not mistaken, is something like Milachkov, something like that. Okay.
Oh, who was this
So you-
commander? Was Givy or was it Motorola that was his
No.
commander?
No. Separate.
Okay.
So
This wasn't the anthill fight in the airport, the anthill that they called it.
No. This is in Lugansk, not Donetsk,
Okay.
right? So I remember a moment when, and back in the day, IDAR was better known than Azov as far as like right-wing neo-Nazi Ukrainian units. And they ambushed an IDAR unit in this forested highway area, like destroyed it. There's he has a YouTube channel. I don't know if it's him or people that like him or know him. It's all in Russian. It starts with a B. Bismarck. And I was stunned because I knew the Rusich guy, and then I saw that video. I'm going, that's the same guy when he was a teenager. And he's like leading this small unit that like destroyed all these trucks, an armored car carrier, and like this one guy who's badly burnt lying on the ground still alive. Like I'll never forget it. It was gruesome. I remember showing it to my brother, and he just pushed my phone away. He goes, "Do not show me this stuff."
Oh man.
So,
Can you
anyways,
still find it or no?
I'll send it to you afterwards.
Right.
Okay, so so that does exist, okay, and Rusich also has like a Polish nationalist branch as well, right? So there are like, hardcore right-wing units fighting on the side of Russia. And, they end up in Wagner. Now, the majority of Westerners do not join these. And I don't consider Poland part of the West in a substantive way. I
Well,
look
according
at them,
to No Opinion and Richard Hanania, they will be part of the West. But that's
Yes,
we're getting out of
that's right,
ourselves.
because they're about to receive a whole lot of enrichment.
Oh no.
Yeah.
That's a different story. They'll demographically become very very Western. You're going to see Lizzo statues in 2 years, but so I would say that that is a thing, right? And off air, we were talking about how different elements of the dissident right, which we have to understand, this is a very, very small group, but it's very interesting to see how they've been divided. Now, I know some who thought, oh my God, this is beautiful. It's amazing. Prigozhin, I was with Putin, but Prigozhin is clearly better. He's going to take over. And oh God, I hope he's going to take over. He has a 50-50 chance. Yeah, 50-50 chance. And I'm going to myself privately, I thought he does not have a 50-50 chance. I wasn't going to say anything. And I asked, what would happen if Prigozhin took over? What would be China and India's response? And their response to my question was, yeah, it could, there could be problems with it, but I think they would eventually accept it. I'm going they're not going to accept it. Think bigger, guys. They're not. Think in the real world. There are people who are ideology kind of can become like a substitution for religion. And I understand why. I don't speak ill of people, particularly in a society that has lacked meaning for so many generations now. I get it. So I don't want to disparage them, but you have to think bigger. You have to think more practically. If that happened, right? You may want
All
want
of
that
Russia would
like
implode. Let's face it. That'd be like geopolitically, there wouldn't be
yeah,
any trust in the Kremlin again for many generations. Maybe not that
right.
long, but it would be a massive blow to the credibility of Russia on the world stage, like a mercenary group taking over a global superpower. Yeah,
I mean, I know where
yeah,
they're coming from. They're thinking,
yeah. Of
they're
course.
thinking if Prigozhin does that, like if Prigozhin does that, then like maybe groups like Azov and all these other extreme right-wing groups, they're going to flip against Zelensky.
Yeah.
Because now Russia has a proper right-wing leader.
What would happen? Okay,
I get the logic.
Right, but okay, let me ask you this now. Now, I'm not
But you
insulting
don't know
people.
that because like a lot of them might just say, no, they're Russian, they're scum. I don't care if they're right-wing. They have to die.
Yeah, right. No, I mean the Ukrainian nationalists, obviously. That's, that goes without
Yeah.
saying. But I'm saying, like, even in Ukraine, now again, I'm not casting shade at anyone. They're Ukrainian nationalists that I respect and so forth. Shocking, right? Shocking I could have a nuanced opinion on things. But I think, okay, let's be realistic here geopolitically when it comes to the state of Washington and the state of the empire. What would happen if those far-right Ukrainian nationalists were to take over the Kremlin? I'm sorry, take over, Freudian slip, were to have taken over Kiev, and they would have ousted Zelensky. What do you think Washington's going to do?
Yeah,
in that situation?
yeah.
Do they want to arm far-right militia? I mean, okay, yes, they are arming far-right militias, but in terms of meaningful political power in a node of influence, and despite the protestations of people like Michael McFaul, or who was the one that debated Mersheimer? Was it McFaul that said, no, it's not a proxy war? Let's be realistic now. That's propaganda. It's a proxy war, and Ukraine is a node of influence. Western Ukraine is a node of influence.
Well, I think we actually have a precedent for this when it comes to radical groups that the U.S. has backed to do its dirty work, then later turning on them when they take power.
And later
I think.
betraying.
I think Iraq and Afghanistan are just key examples of this, where,
right.
The quote-unquote Mujahideen, the freedom fighters of Afghanistan, it was completely fine when the Soviet Communist government was in power, but the minute they took power in the 90s, it was sanctions, it was threatening of invasions, it was eventual toppling of the government.
Rocky, was it Rocky? No, was it a Rambo 3, like the brave fighters of the Mujahideen in
yes,
Afghanistan?
Yes, that's what it was, the end title thing where it's...
but see, this is, like, again, very, like, I say this with respect. I have a respectful disagreement with Ukrainian nationalists in saying that I do not believe that the people that run the State Department in Washington have the best interests of the right wing in Ukraine.
No kidding.
Like, no, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that I understand the logic of people who are Ukrainian nationalists in terms of, like, same with the Mujahideen, and not to compare the two, obviously, because that's totally different, and, like, different religion, different ethos, different everything. But I'm saying in terms of the geopolitics of the situations, I understand getting help from whatever you can get, right? Like, for example, in Bosnia, those Muslims were not very particularly radical Islamists, right? It's just that they were going to take help from whatever they could get. If Saudi Arabia wants to give them help, then fine.
I mean, if you want to talk about
Twisted
Alliance, let's talk about the Lebanese Civil War where Saddam Hussein was arming Christian militias.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, the point being is that I understand the logic of, like, wanting to take the help from the West. Okay, obviously they're fighting a war against Russia, but I don't think that Victoria Nuland and Michael McFaul and Alexander Vindman and well, who's the new guy now? It's not Milley, but, like, that's for argument's sake, Milley. I don't think that they have the back of Ukrainian far-right nationalists. I'm sorry. I understand the logic of taking their support.
No, that's their European ISIS or Al Qaeda. That's what they are to them.
Yeah, no, but
right? They
I mean,
understand that these are the people who are going to be most motivated to fight. It's not going to be liberals with their protests and their protest signs. These guys are going to be the most motivated to fight. There's a reason why.
And it's also a convenient disposal of them. That's
that's why Ukrainian nationalists and Nazi collaborators were not tried afterwards. That's why, like, America has never asked Ukraine to get rid of a Bandera statue. That's why.
Oh, but they will though. That's what my argument is that if
Oh,
Ukraine
down
wins,
the road,
they will.
yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
they're going by evidence, but they're not seeing. They don't want to like. The only way you can ever trip them up is say, well, you know, like America regularly shows respect to the nationalist founders of other countries. Why aren't they? I get it. They don't talk about you putting up Bandera statues, but you ever wonder like why? I mean, they know why.
Yeah.
They know why because America's 58% white, but I mean, I'm just saying, long before the war, Ukrainian nationalists have been working with the Americans for many decades, whether they lived in Ukraine or not, right? And it has always been for this day to come.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm saying like if those people had meaningful political power in terms of like the war not going the way they want
Right.
to, and they'll oust Z-Man, that I wouldn't be shocked if all of those military supplies, the West suddenly said, you know what? We actually don't have that many stockpiles anymore for you.
America would right then ask for negotiations to freeze the conflict where the
Yeah.
borders are right now.
Well, I think that
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that we've actually seen this happen, and we actually have evidence that this did happen because I remember having kept up with as long as I have, and I'm sure GSP remembers. And look, I don't know how long you've been keeping up with the whole Ukrainian conflict, Geo, even going back, but I'm going to assume you've been keeping up since at least like the mid 2010s.
Yeah, like I heard like back in the 2000s, I heard about it. I watched some of those Vice documentaries, but
Yes.
then, yeah, I didn't nearly
So
as much as you guys.
I think you'll just point being I think both of you certainly have enough prerequisite knowledge to know what I'm talking about. So in following all of this, I remember I think it was the British media in particular in 2019, mid 2019, was putting out piece after piece about the far right indoctrination of children in Ukraine and the right wing militias in Ukraine. And at that point, it looked like the Ukraine conflict had just completely frozen over, that nothing was really going to happen for decades at that point, and that it was just a complete stalemate between the pro Russian side and the Ukrainian government. And
well, the CBC here in Canada had the same like neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They were having whole articles about that and how a lot of them were traveling to Canada. I think Gordon, you remember that? Even the CBC.
I remember.
I think we do have precedent that
because
when
Trump was in power, that's part of the reason.
Oh, absolutely.
But not the only reason.
Absolutely. And once again, as it looked like a frozen conflict, as the quote-unquote right wing was ascendant in North America, at least in the U.S. and parts of Europe, they had to come down hard on the right wing in Ukraine and places like Ukraine. And, of course, you saw this going up until about the 2021 standoff in April 2021, where those started to get scrubbed. People talked about less and less. And then it started to become more apologetic for as we got late into 2021, early into 2022. And then, of course, by the outbreak of the war, they had all sorts of justifications, all sorts of mental gymnastics they would throw themselves through to explain what these symbols actually are and how they don't represent any far right or quote unquote hateful ideology. Again, the rest is history. So we can assume once this conflict freezes, and look, if we do get autumn negotiations, which the Pentagon itself said it was interested in at the beginning of the year. Now, depending on how things go, that could change. The Pentagon is a very fickle
The Chinese even
organization.
said there will be by the autumn.
But let's just, for the sake of the point I'm trying to make, let's just assume there are autumn negotiations that bring about some sort of ceasefire in this conflict that has at least some longevity. I'm not saying an end to the conflict. I'm not saying terribly long, but I'm talking a few months, maybe a year, just for the sake of the scenario. I mean, at that point, you would see a lot of these right-wing guys in Ukraine disappearing, being funneled elsewhere. Like I said, I think the best case scenario for a lot of these guys in Ukraine after the war ends is they become American mercenaries to do dirty work in parts of the Middle East, Africa, wherever else we have interests. Worst case scenario is they get shipped off to The Hague because they were on the wrong side of it. Or what's probably going to happen to most of them is they'll be quietly dealt with, whether they're put out to pasture figuratively or literally. So but I do think if we get a freeze over the conflict, they're going to do what they can to thin Ukraine at the ranks of the right-wing elements while still trying to maintain a competent military force when the inevitable conflict reignites. So once just to bolster your point there.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. Like, I think like you would have, if you're looking like purely from an objective, like materialist standpoint, geopolitical standpoint, you do have a human resource there, a very well trained, very jacked, very well motivated troops that have had combat experience. Now, the absolute worst case scenario is if like this, like for lack of a better term, like shitlib Ukraine happens, where the West comes in with their like libtardation Marshall Plan, and they're like, you know what, we have to divest ourselves of the new Ukrainian identity is going to be gay pride parades in Kiev, and we have to divest ourselves of our past and our history, and you basically have to submit. And to do this, you have to get rid of this far-right element within Ukrainian society and with the military in particular. That will spell very bad things for these far-right paramilitary groups. And but I do think
they got themselves into an impossible situation.
It is an impossible situation. Yeah. Now the only thing I can think of where the Ukrainian nationalists actually probably, if they are losing this badly, the only thing I could think of is if they do switch to sort of like North Korea demilitarized zone, or they'll go back to like the way it was after 2014, where they take pot shots at each other. There's more or less very little, if no, movement whatsoever, and like the memes become real. Like the memes of like, they've negotiated over a city block and they've taken the post office and a few lampposts. They've like those memes, right? Like I think one of the funniest ones was an Amarnite said that they're going to liberate Dima's basement from Russia's attitude. That was funny. I don't know why I found that funny, but like very small, like very small increments. I think like in the only way that the nationalists on both sides could benefit is if it goes back to like this hot stalemate, in other words, because then the West would still need them, and they wouldn't have to face sort of a denazification by like libtardation Kiev regime. Yeah, that's the only way I could think of them benefiting from this.
Well, it's much the same case with a country like Poland, like a lot of these Baltic states, and just honestly right-wing movements across Europe. And you'll see today that the AfD in Germany won some regional elections. Now, the AfD, at least for now, I can't give them too much credit off the bat, seems to have a very middle-of-the-road rational attitude towards relations with Russia. But, I mean, if we're talking about right-wing governments in Italy, right-wing governments in other parts of Western Europe, they have bought into the Gladio nationalism. They are on top of that. Of course, the newest cope is that the Wagner group is actually behind mass migration waves because they're displacing so many innocent people from Africa and the Middle East and whatever else. They ignore the overthrow of Gaddafi and the floodgates that we opened.
Just ignore all the 2000s, right?
Yeah, just ignore all of that. Wagner's destabilizing the Middle East and Africa. But these movements, so long as there is a latent conflict with Russia, will be allowed to prosper, will be allowed to take footholds. They will be allowed to push back on certain things, not everything, but certain things. They'll put some things on the shelves. And I think they'll do this even domestically in the U.S. coming into 2024. They'll put up some things. For example, if there does tend to be a right-wing trend in the next U.S. election, and they do let the GOP win, I'm not saying it will disappear entirely, but they'll probably shelve a lot of the pride stuff. They'll moderate it a lot, where it's going to be something of less focus. We've discussed this in depth time and time again.
You know what they won't? No, but you know what they won't shelve? What they'll never stop?
Philo-Semitism.
What issue is that? Oh, okay, yeah. Besides that, but no, no immigration. They'll like all of these right-wing governments that they're going to like if the plan is to like let the people vote for them for once. I don't see them stopping the flow of immigration. That's the one sacred cow that they need in order to destabilize.
Well, yeah, and then it's a win-win because they get to delegitimize the right-wing governments that promise to curtail immigration by saying, well, look, they haven't stopped immigration. What's the point? And, of course, that massive demoralization campaign.
You know how I know? You know how I know this is happening in America? You know how I know this? Because...
Go on.
I'll tell you why. Because conservatards that watch Fox News... a Tucker Carlson absent Fox News. And now I've said this before, that the anti-Muslim thing was stupid in a North American context, not in Europe, North America. It was overblown. But notice how Fox News, they're now doing the based Muslim against trans child story hour thing, against pride parades in schools. They're doing the based Muslim things, or the based Hispanic, but mostly based Muslims. They're doing this now. That is clear, because that's what they want. They want this, like, you know, Mahek and wholesome, multiracial, working class opposition against, you know, a very legitimate concern, which is the, you know, the transing of schools. But I think that, again, this is a way to throw off their sort of nonstop global airport immigration plan. And they're already doing this. And I think in Germany they'll probably do the equivalent.
Oh, absolutely. Just name a Western
Muslim
nation, and that's the case. And once again, to invoke the name of dear old Stalin Frog, who hung up his hat, perhaps the wisest of all of us in any of these spheres, he said that, and he was referring particularly to the energy and economy in Europe, unless there's a right-wing revolution within the next few months to a year, Europe is just completely toast. And again, that's true of immigration. That's true of most issues, frankly. But yeah, I think that's really the conclusion we can draw on all of this. And I feel like we're treading old ground, but it is necessary to repeat because, as I've said for 5 years on the show, repetition is key. You need to drill home these points. You need to make sure that you need to be able to recite these things in your sleep whenever you talk to anyone about them, frankly, is the attitude I take towards it. But once again,
well, speaking of Poland.
Oh boy, here we go.
Look, okay, I will shut up. Speaking of
Go
Poland,
ahead.
GSP said
No.
If GSP wants to talk about Poland, I will sit my Mediterranean ass down and listen.
According to No Opinion, according to Noah Smith on Twitter, Poland is going to be more westernized. Yeah, because they're letting in all this immigration. They're taking more arms from America, so they're going to be part of the West.
Yes.
Yeah. And according to Richard Hanania and Anatoly Karlin, let me read you their takes. Okay, I posted this on Telegram. So Anatoly Karlin said Poland is run by clerical reactionaries, homophobes, and misogynists. Not a positive role model for any normal person. Then Richard Hanania replied to him saying, "Yeah, but thankfully the reactionaries are dying off. Their elections are close, and young people vote for the globalist party like everyone else. As long as they don't abolish democracy, like right-wingers enjoy doing due to their racism, I'm optimistic about Poland." So racism, you can't have democracy unless you're anti-racist. Racism and democracy can never. I mean, it existed for a long time, racism and democracy. But according to Anania nowadays, racist liberalism cannot be a thing. So I'm very sorry, Atrazine Graper. I'm very sorry. Racist liberalism cannot be a thing, according to. I'm sorry. I have a great admiration and respect for Atrazine Graper, but the whole like racist liberalism meme was a thing.
Well, it's funny how inevitably you always have to choose one or the other.
Like, racism or democracy? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can talk about
way.
19th, 20th century democracies all you want. Maybe they had their merits, and perhaps they accomplished great things. I'm not here to be a judge of history in that regard, at least in this context. But looking at where we are right now, sitting as we're recording, June 25th, 2023, it's a mutually exclusive choice. Now, maybe one day in some utopian future we can have racist liberalism once again, like our forefathers did, but that time is not going to be anytime soon.
Oh, boy. Oh my god. No, but the Hanania takes about like the coup has been like incredible about like it's just it never ends with Hanania.
Yeah, I hope people realize that any Anatoly Karlin is shit by now. Like I've been saying it for a long time.
You know what's funny?
A long time.
You know what's funny is that I actually did this interview with Indian Bronson for Content Minded, and we were talking about Karlin, and in all fairness, like Karlin, his point is that like as a rationalist, it's like this is what like high IQ rich people believe in. So there's obviously a reason for that. But then like Anatoly Karlin being like, you know what, that's that's what's conducive to like rich, smart, potential transhumanist people is like being a libtard. So
Look,
go ahead,
Yeah.
Constantine. What were you gonna
I
say?
will spare any commentary on Carlin just because I think everything that can be said has been said. But I do want to address this phenomenon because you brought it up, where these people, they always put the cart before the horse. Well, clearly it's the insane libtardism that led to wealth and democracy, not the fact that we're rich enough and prosperous enough to experiment with insane libtardism.
Right.
It's completely backwards.
Well, that's what I mean.
I
Like,
mean,
yeah.
the
Go
whole
ahead.
thing, the whole point of democratic liberalism is to prevent any kind of nationalism,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Particularly ethno-nationalism. That's its entire function, right? And America made that choice a long time ago. The last show that we did, I read what Murray, the former naval officer, psychiatrist at Stanford University, who experimented on Kaczynski, said. It's befallen on us to create a global government that will never ever see authoritarian rule again, right? And so this is this is from the late 50s that he wrote that. And but I do have an interesting meeting that took place in Poland a few days ago, just I think a day or two before Prigozhin's assault on the Kremlin. We need to convince the Russians that they lost. American professor Ilian Cohen at the conference at the Polish Institute of International Relations told how to prevent the victory of the Russians. Quote, the defeat of Russia does not require a march on Moscow, which was rarely a good idea in the past. The West must convince Russia that it has failed. This approximate
It was
defeat
a bad
is better
idea.
achieved.
They admitting that now
Yeah,
that it was a bad idea.
is better achieved in their minds. How to do it, regardless of the course of hostilities, the population of Russia must be convinced that the struggle was futile and that the price paid in blood was in no way worth it. After all, he's quoted German philosopher Karl von Clausewitz. The West should lead an aggressive information campaign, as if they haven't, to constantly unnerve the population of Russia with the thought they will arm Ukraine to the teeth for many years to convince the Russians that their generals are outdated and incompetent, that the high command is indifferent to the lives of their people, that the equipment is inferior to that of the Ukrainians supplied by the West, and on and on and on. Like as if they should do that. You have been doing that. You've been doing that like implicitly and explicitly for a very long time, not just 2 years, but for a
And
very long time.
it's also not very creative because, as you said, a very long time. Because everything you just said reminds me of the mainstream historical narrative about the lead up to the Russian Revolution. The Russian people were just so discontent because 1917, the generals didn't care about the people, they were leading them in human wave attacks. And once again, all this propaganda that I think we've all heard 500,000 times at this point. And clearly the Russians must rise
Mm-hmm.
up like they did in 1917 to overthrow that. And it becomes even funnier from the Polish perspective because the damn Russian Empire, they couldn't stop oppressing us. Then they overthrew the Tsar, everything was good. But then that damn Soviet Union couldn't stop oppressing us. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. But then that damn Russian Federation can't stop oppressing us to the point where
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
no
It's
satisfactory
always a Prussian
conclusion
Olympics.
until Russia implodes. And that's fundamentally where Poland stands at this
Yeah,
point. And look, it doesn't even have to be this way. And look, I'm not going to get into the bitter ethnic rivalry between the Russians and the Poles. Frankly, that's their problem. But speaking as somebody who wants to see like a pragmatic, peaceful world with some degree of cooperation, I'm no globalist, don't get me wrong, but I'd like some degree of peace and cooperation among the nations of the world, especially among European and let's just say at least formerly Christian part of the world. I think that would be a fundamentally positive thing. I know it's utopian, but let a man dream. But it didn't have
yeah.
to be this
He
way.
he does he does go on in this piece to say we must see the masses of Russians fleeing, deserting, shooting their officers, captured or killed. The
Oh my
defeat
god.
the
What?
defeat of Russia must be unmistakably big and a bloody rout.
What kind
So
of
the master
fanfic is
plan to
this?
defeat Russia is just tell them they've lost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As if
they want to
haven't.
meme it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you can meme magic your way into like average Russian citizens taking pitchforks to to their commanders. Like
Civilizational death by finger wagging.
it's
That's the
well, wasn't there?
That is
Yeah,
the
like
golden strategy.
weren't there Polish writers that talked about how actually
He's not
relative to
Polish.
the,
He's an American Jew. He's just
oh
visiting the
yeah, no,
Polish Institute of International Studies.
no, but I mean like what Constantine you were talking about the Poles. There were Polish writers, if I recall, that even like during the Soviet Union said like, well, the suffering under the Tsar actually probably wasn't that bad compared to the suffering under the Soviet Union. So it's like, I don't know. It's Poland is very interesting in this regard. I feel like they're prepping something.
Corvin, the Polish politician Corvin. So he recently said something about the problem with the Polish mind. He said the problem with the Polish mind is it says, okay, you can destroy half of Poland as long as you destroy all of Russia.
Oh god!
But we have to remember the most important thing about Poland. 100 years ago, they managed to repel an expeditionary force led by Trotsky. Therefore, they are a military superpower for the rest of history.
Forever and ever.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, the miracle in the Vistula is that it wasn't a miracle. It's just what the Poles do. Apparently, it's funny thing about that, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have read several sources that actually pointed out it was white cavalry generals who repelled the Soviet invasion in 1920 that went into exile in Poland. Which I think is even funnier when we're looking at, like, it's supposed to be this great Polish victory led by Russian officers against the diversity coalition of the Soviets. But I'm getting,
that was black on black crime, right there.
Oh no!
To the
Oh
Polish.
No! But I'm getting lost in the weeds here. But
did you like that when, like, to the Poles, Russians fighting Russians is black on black crime? Get it?
Oy vey.
There was one Twitter space I remember with Bleep Sama, who said that like to the Finnish the Rush. Well, I'm not going to complete what he said, but it's
I know the one.
Black on black crime.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention, because I lost you guys at one point. I came back. Just to briefly go back to Semyagog, I want to say that every time that I've been in his chat, he always greets me. He's a very honorable guy, so I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
no. Just credit where credit is due. I can always appreciate that. But so the future trajectory of Russia in the rest of the war, I think it's a broad topic, but I think it's an inevitable topic, and we can break it down piece by piece. We can get too much in the weeds, and I do have to warn you guys, just because of time constraints and when we're recording, I probably can go for about another hour, which would put us just shy of the 3-hour mark. But once again, do you think, and I touched on this point earlier, but I think it warrants further discussion. I really want you guys to go in depth about it. Do you think this tarnishes Russia's credibility too much, having both to enemies and allies? Do you think that this will create a crisis of confidence? Now, I'm not saying that India and China will suddenly flip and sanction Russia tomorrow, but I am saying, do you think it will give some of Russia's emerging partners a little bit of pause? Now, that's not POZ, that is PAUSE. Let's be very clear, because on this program, you need to clarify these things. But do you think it will cause some degree of hesitation when it comes to cooperating with Russia in the future? Now, again, we touched on this. If this actually did succeed, it would be a major blemish for Russia, the fact that a mercenary company was able to topple a military superpower, and that it would cause a great degree of apprehension within Russia's emerging partners. But do you think the fact that an incident like this even happened, even though it was resolved in less than 48 hours, do you think this is going to have a long-term impact on Russia's reputation? And do you think the Western media will either sweep this under the rug and forget it ever happened, or do you think this is going to be something they hammer on about to try to say that Russia is a weak power in decline?
Let me just go back to Richard Anania to bash Anania
of course.
hour for a minute. So the take that people were ratioing him on was there's no good ending for the Russian people that doesn't recognize their entire culture and civilizational model has failed. And the country that has remained along Western lines, tough pillow to swallow, but every other path is toward certain disaster. And people are absolutely ratioing him, saying that, well, look at the West right now. I mean, did it work in Iraq and Afghanistan? But also, like, does it work even domestically? I mean, there was a great take by a Kafefianon. If Russia doesn't voluntarily choose sunsetting, we'll force them and make them look like an accident, like other vessels. So TFR, total fertility rate of Japan, is 1.39, South Korea 111, Taiwan 1.9. Europe is worse because Prague pets are breeding there. Whose civilizational model has failed? So in other words, what Kafefianon is saying that basically every like pet empire, imperial project of America, and Japan being one of them, they all have disastrous fertility rates for some reason. Same with South Korea, same with Taiwan, and maybe one day even Ukraine. Who knows? Okay, although Ukraine has a very good birth rate.
Does it? I don't think so.
Oh, it doesn't have a good birth. Have you seen those Ukrainian women though?
Well, I mean, Ukraine is going to have.
I mean,
Ukraine's going to have a remarkable birth rate, but that's because all their women are going to get hired out by, let's just say, rainbow men in the West to bear their children. It's going to be the entire. That's going to keep the Ukrainian birth rate at a certain bottom line. But insofar as the prosperity and future of the Ukrainian people, that's probably as bleak as anywhere else in Europe.
Well, has the Ukrainian birth rate been falling?
I think, yeah, more or less.
From what I remember seeing, it's not great. Like, I'm just saying. The other thing is, of course,
and then immigration.
That's
immigration is actually the
big. Russia has all these railroad incidents that are results of like Ukrainian saboteurs. How does America explain like all their ecological disasters because of the trains falling apart? Like it's almost like Hanania was literally in Poland at this Cohen meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. Like every area of the empire that has been affected has not been for the better. Like, okay, there will be, like in the 1990s, there were temporary benefits to the allies of the empire, but that it slowly fades. And of course, my good friend Ian Bronson points out China seems to be doing fine. Western civilization and free market democracy / political liberalism are alive and well in Detroit. But it doesn't seem like places you're choosing to live, right? So, no, but I mean, this is just the arrogance of like being an apparatchik of the empire. But the point being is that, to tie into your question, Constantine, there will be a temporary optics failure of Russia, obviously. I mean, this is a total embarrassment. Long term, though, I'm less concerned about the outside and I'm more probably concerned with the inside. In terms of the immediate war effort, it's probably best for the Kremlin to concern themselves with the opinion of the average Russian citizen than the allies on the outside. I think eventually Putin will have to go to Beijing and he'll have to go to Mumbai, and he'll have to like go to his allies and say, listen, we dealt with it very quickly and there's no big deal, and Wagner's under the control of the Russian military, and like all of this, like I know that you people have your own liberation movements that you don't want them getting any ideas. I think that Putin's going to probably have to go and do an apologia tour.
I mean, now that you say that, yeah. I do think there is potential for Putin to spin this in his favor with his allies, where he can say, well, look what they tried to do to me. They're going to try to do that to you. This can't be a time when we start to turn on each other and distrust each other. So I think while the West is probably going to run with this and they're going to squeeze every bit of juice they can out of this, I do think there's potential where, once again, you had Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and several other Central Asian countries. They signed that pact back in March, like on how to quote-unquote prevent color revolution. So I imagine he can bring up that protocol and say, well, look at what they tried to do to me. You think you guys aren't next? You think they don't have something up their sleeves about this? I mean, they can even point to
Taiwan. Taiwan's probably...
Yeah, they can point to examples that have happened in these countries. I mean, think about Tiananmen Square. I mean, that was probably, if we're being honest, a nascent color revolution that was put down very quickly. But, again, not to delve too far into that issue, But point being is, while I do think the West is going to do this, while I do think they're trying to hammer Russia on credibility and try to peel off maybe countries like India, I think China is more of a foregone conclusion at this point, because even if China and Russia have a amount of distrust and distaste for each other, not that I'm saying they do, the concerns with the West and Taiwan, once again, that has already been set into motion. But maybe these countries like India, maybe the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and arguably even Iran, depending on how U.S.-Iranian negotiations go over the so-called nuclear deal at this point, because apparently that's something that they're still trying to resuscitate. But yeah, I think there's potential where they're going to try to peel away countries on the periphery. But also, I think when door shuts, window opens, etc., there's plenty of opportunity for Putin to turn this around and say, well, look at what they tried to do. Now is a time for unity. Now is a time to galvanize yourself against the West. Because, and I don't know how he's going to exactly pin this, whether he's going to say this is a Western-backed coup, but again, there's many ways that can be spun. We all know what the West is going to do with this, but I think also it becomes the question of what Russia's going to do with this. But to revisit, we have a general idea of what the West is going to do. I just wonder how hard they're going to do it and what angle they're exactly going to approach it from, and how successful it will be at peeling away countries on the periphery. I'm just going to say outright, I don't think it'll be successful at all, but they're going to try their damnedest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that Prigozhin's almost complete takeover of the Kremlin happened when Modi was visiting Biden. Just something to think about. My take on it is this: every one of these governments knew that it would end in nothing.
Yeah.
If any of these governments want to pretend like they didn't know it would end in nothing, then I would say it is for other reasons that they are pretending. But who might do that? Turkey, but that's probably because of difficulties in Syria. I don't even see countries like Egypt being persuaded. Definitely not India or China. It's not going to work. Iran on Telegram was like telling Russians that we're going to send forces to help you. No. All this will do is create an entrenchment. If you were pro-Western, you're going to be more pro-Western. If you're pro-Eastern, you're going to be more pro-Eastern. That's all it will do.
Yes, I think there's a negligible amount of...
I don't think it's going to fundamentally change, because it wasn't like a 72-hour thing. It wasn't even 24. It's done. Like, the guy's like, what, 300 kilometers from Moscow, and he gets a call and says, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, these are governments. They're not normies. They're governments. They deal with statecraft all the time. And when they see this, they know there's something not right. They're not normies.
You mean to tell me that Xi Jinping is smarter than the average person that watches CNN?
Yeah. They're not even like geopolitical comedy shows.
I like that label.
As good as that is. So no, I don't think so. It's too far down the game. Like I say, it's an entrenchment thing. This will bolster the West. I will say this, that Prigozhin's stunt has prolonged the war. He has done that. He has, again, you have to weigh the pros and cons, because if you go with the idea that this is giving the West an off-ramp on a failed counteroffensive, because Reznikov was interviewed in English, and he said, this offensive has been overhyped. It's not one counteroffensive, because you have to remember, right? Like the day before Prigozhin launched this, Ukraine started their 11th mobilization. Here's some bullet points for that. No man between 18 and 58 can have, you cannot have a medical reason not to be part of the military anymore. That stops. Where are they? They want 90,000, right? There's already been several Western news sources that have described the losses of life. You can say that the Russians have hyped it up, but after 18 days of the 19 days of the counteroffensive, like Ukraine goes on its 11th mobilization, looking for 90,000.
And if I have my facts correct on that, to add to what you're saying, they're dipping more and more into Western Ukrainian populations for conscription now.
Yes, because they're going to be recruiting from Chernigov, Kiev Oblast, and Ivano-Frankovsk. Right? Especially Ivano-Frankovsk. That is like one of the heartlands of that's where Venetia is. That's one of the heartlands of Ukrainian nationalism.
Yeah, that's like the center of Galicia.
They had a great black metal fest, by the way.
So,
no, on that part, yeah.
Hope that they don't get recruited. So you bring guitar, okay? I show you other guitars.
They'll go in there with their corpse paint. They'll go to the front, yeah.
They're going to conscript a band that created Fortress Bakhmut song. Fortress Bakhmut. I'm retaking Bakhmut.
Oh my God. Therell be so many war songs after this war. Yeah.
So my take is this is a new re-entrenchment of already fixed lines. The lines are deeper. It was just dealt with too quickly, right? It was so sus from the beginning, including Prigozhin's, oh my God, they attacked me. And there's this old video, and it's like, you see like maybe one dead guy and like a hand and a foot. Like, what? It's in this forest. Like, are you kidding me?
Before I broach the next topic,
it's so bad. It's so fake.
Before I broach the next
there's
topic,
a lot of fakery in this.
I just have a keen observation about all of this. Now, let's take a look at some of the key players in this war effort so far. So we have, of course, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. We have Evgeny Prigozhin, who is head of Wagner, and then you have a guy like Surovikin. And I think I can only draw one conclusion from all of that, is that the Norwoods have gone insane.
No, maybe Surovikin is kind of like Sean. No, it's got to be Shoigu. Has to be Shawn Michaels in the screwjob narrative. But I want like Putin should go up, like when he'll get interviewed by Russia Today or whatever, or what's the big news one? The Task, is that the news agency?
Task,
Task, yeah. So they'll go up and they'll ask about like how Prigozhin is like exiled to Belarus, and he'll say, "I didn't screw Prigozhin. Prigozhin screwed Prigozhin."
Yeah.
That was the famous one. Brett screwed Brett. Yeah.
Now,
I do think, even if no one ever talks about this again, I think just the machination of things in the next month, we're going to probably figure out what happened. It's going to be a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to ride a wave of unadulterated autism, even unknown to this program thus far. And I'm looking forward to every moment of it. I will say that just right off the bat, number one. Number two, to get more back on track with this, unlike American trains. By the way, another one just derailed in Montana like 2 days ago. I always like to just keep you guys just up to date with these sort of things. I think it's a very interesting topic to keep track of. But I do, and I know we touched on this before, I know several people have touched on this, but I want to go further in depth about it, about the organizational future of Wagner, both in Ukraine and its other operations, such as in Syria and other parts of the Middle East and Africa. Now, what will happen to the organization? Will it be rebranded and sold off to another face, maybe much more, let's just say, optical and able to conduct himself than Prigozhin? Will be rolled into the Russian armed forces proper? Because, I mean, there are benefits of having it as a mercenary company. You can have them do some, let's just say, more subtle
off-book activity.
operations. They're more extra-legal operations. I'm saying that in a completely value-neutral way. I'm not saying that it's a horrible thing or a great thing that it's doing. This is just a fact that they do these kind of things. And the question is, how will that continue? Because I can't imagine Russia will getting rid of the private military contractor element of Wagner and rolling them properly into the armed forces.
No.
At this point, I think it's, I don't know, maybe not exactly the same formula, but much like how a government like Russia would buy off a corporation, nationalize it, and then sell it off to some bidder, maybe for political favors or some other reason, in which case they put a new name and a new face to it, and then operations continue as usual under hopefully more competent management. I see something, maybe not that exact process, but something akin to that process happening with Wagner because they're too indispensable in places like Syria, in several African theaters, especially as the situation in
Hmm.
Sudan ebbs and flows. I know it's calmed down in particular. And of course, we haven't seen the last of instability in Africa and the Middle East and elsewhere. Wagner is going to be one of these organizations that Russia can deploy, that they can employ to send them to do work that maybe isn't of the highest priority for the Russian military proper, but still needs to get done. And once again, we've seen they've been indispensable in Ukraine. No matter what else you could say, they have been. They've punched far above their weight, and I can't imagine they're going to let any of this go to waste. And again, it depends on. I think another question we need to ask, that which we will see answers to in the coming days and weeks: how much of this was just Prigozhin? What officers and forces in Wagner remained loyal to Prigozhin and partook in this little convoy? What will the punishment for them be? What, if any, will they be reassigned? Because I can imagine probably quite a few skilled and adept men took part in this little stunt here that the Russians probably aren't eager to either throw into jails or exile. Because, once again, these are fierce fighters. They have done more than what anyone would have expected in the battlefields thus far, even going back to, let's just say, peripheral battlefields like Syria, like Sudan, like a myriad of different conflict zones. And I can't imagine, and I don't think anyone here thinks, but just in general, Russia throwing a lot of that away. The fact that there'll probably have to be some degree of amnesty. Prigozhin got sent off to his punishment in Belarus, where he has to till the fields for potatoes personally for Lukashenko. It's fate worse than death, frankly. I certainly don't envy the man, but but point being is, there's going to have to be some degree of amnesty and reconciliation. And as you get when you put down some sort of protest movement, you see this almost inevitably where, while there is a swift hand of punishment, there is always backdoor concessions as to the protesters' demands. Where, I mean, even this even happened in Iran during the recent wave of protests, where they had a very, what many would consider, heavy-handed crackdown, but then you saw them loosening some of the responsibilities of the morality police, where they weren't supposed to be as strict with the enforcement, to try to prevent a future situation like this. Whereas you had the public display of strength, and then quietly you had to acquiesce to some demands in order to prevent a future situation like that. Not too much to the point where they think they can get anything you want out of it, but enough at least to ease the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god. That's funny. That
Oh, that's a very nice little internal message. Would you like me to show the audience your little?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can tech boomer this, because we in the show group chat we have a very interesting little piece here. Let me see if it downloaded properly, because I'm sure those longtime War Report fans know my track record with our friends when it comes to tech. Oh, perfect! It did download properly, so I will go ahead and show this to the audience, because this is too good to pass up.
Maybe he'll become Lukashenko's personal chef. Not just like he'll pick potatoes of the day.
I mean,
at nighttime he'll guide the kitchen.
Don't eat the potato salad.
Okay, but there is Lukashenko with his new farmhand, and it's wonderful. I think it's great when people embrace their the tradition of their ancestors. He's working the fields. He's getting calluses on his hands like a real man should have, and he's earning his keep under the generosity of a great man like Alexander Lukashenko. And look, I think this is something that all failed coup leaders should have to go through. I think, frankly,
That's like Idi Amin in Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. And I think we're onto something. And look, I know many, including myself upon the outbreak of this war, dispelled a lot of their notions about fourth and fifth generation warfare. But I do think that we are seeing a new era of warfare where certain things must be punished in certain ways, and perhaps a harsh punishment, even receiving the death penalty, would be too harsh for somebody like Prigozhin, with everything that he embodies and everything that he has done, for good or for ill, and that sometimes you need to have a little bit of a creative response to these sort of things. And I think that image, I cannot keep up this nonsense any longer. Please, it's your guys' take. I'm going too far off the deep end with this.
Do you think Prigozhin is not long for this world, or I don't know? I mean,
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
I think
That's a tough one.
Will they erect a gallows in the Red Square? Punished? No, I don't know. Probably not.
Look, if he remains quiet in his exile, I think he will be allowed to live out on his Belarusian estate relatively undisturbed. But I think if he starts rabble-rousing again, he's going to, let's just say, meet a much less pleasant end.
Yeah, he'll be like Napoleon exiled in where he was exiled, Corsica?
I think it was Elba the first time, and then I can't remember.
Elba.
Yeah.
Elba, that's right.
I mean,
he died of stomach cancer, right?
Yeah. I think Elba was the first exile. I can't remember the second exile. It was some like far-flung island. But point being is, how horrible to have to live on a nice, pristine island. That's a fate worse than death for me personally. Or a Belarusian estate. Once again, a fate worse than death for me personally. But once again, I don't see Prigozhin really rabble-rousing too much at this point. Even if there was the motive, even if he did have the desire to, there's really nothing to be gained at this point. He's just drawing more unnecessary heat to himself. I think, look, despite how bombastic and frankly ridiculous he can be at times, I think the man knows what the score is, and there's really no point. And I don't think, despite his ego, I think he realizes there's no coming back from this, and that he can either enjoy his exile, or he can meet a much less pleasant end.
Yeah.
Now, I could be completely wrong about this, and if Prigozhin would like to have some polonium tea, that's his prerogative, or if the Kremlin decides to serve him some. But we'll see. And I don't know, maybe he'll become an indispensable asset of the Belarusian state. Maybe he'll become Lukashenko's go-to guy to put down the next color revolution or the Polish invasion. Maybe that's his new assignment. Maybe this is his redemption arc. Who knows? But I think, actually, and I don't think this is a really unique take on my part, a lot of what he's going to do is probably going to depend on how the Belarusian state treats him, and also certain events within the Belarusian state. Now, I doubt he'll go turncoat, I doubt he'll support a color revolution, but point being is, I mean, I think it's a matter of if rather than when something is going to happen in Belarus again, in which case that might be his opportunity to reemerge. But for the near future, I think Prigozhin will probably go quiet.
There's a chance. There's a chance. Like, again, I think what happens to him will probably indicate like what actually happened more clearly.
Yeah.
Like, obviously if he's not a threat, then the chances that this was some kind of mostly well coordinated psyop, then yeah. If this was, like you say, a Montreal screwdriver, then screw job. Then he'll be monitored. I mean, there's all this talk. Morawiecki, the prime minister of Poland, made a statement that he's putting his troops on high alert because now with Prigozhin,
now the evil Prigozhin's going to take control of the Belarusian military and bomb Lodz and Warsaw and.
Yes. It's all that. There was a British general, Dannett, who said this makes Prigozhin very dangerous.
No, it doesn't.
Like I know. Like I say, it's unbelievable how quickly it dissolved. We all understand that the democracy is fake and gay, that the sovereign is always one
he who
amongst the very
state of exception.
Yes, and there were no elites that backed this guy. Now, maybe he's emotionally like messed up, and he thought, like whatever. Like it's very emotional. I think there's no doubt that Wagner is like really important for Russians. Like Putin has to give some concession here.
Absolutely.
Right? These guys are heroes. And Russia is more concerned how Russians interpret what happened in those 24 hours than anyone in the world, including India or China. That is number one what has to be stated, right? They cannot condemn Wagner, right? They cannot do it. They would lose their legitimacy.
Absolutely. Even if there are slap on the wrist punishments, even if there is a rebranding, they're going to have to give some legitimacy to Wagner or a successor organization. But I actually want to take a moment to have, and I think we've been having a lot of fun with this, frankly, given the subject matter. But I want to take a moment to have a little bit more fun with this because I want to hear. I'll start, but I want to hear your most schizo take on Prigozhin's future. I'll start with mine. Poland will enter the war. That's a given.
Oh.
And as a result of that, Prigozhin will get his redemption arc. He will be given full control of Kaliningrad and all of its military forces for the sole purpose of waging war on Poland. That is Prigozhin's future. Outdo my schizophrenia.
Prigozhin has the codes in Kaliningrad. Uncle Batka has the codes in Minsk. Europe is finished.
Toast.
Oh my god. Prigozhin will be like a Yukio Mishima type of figure. He will lead a far-right paramilitary into the center of Belarus, and he will take over, but he'll succeed instead of sunsetting this time. And that's my schizo take.
Okay.
He will lead those sensitive young men who watch anime and have recently spent their time on the front in Bakhmut, and he will lead a revolution in Belarus. Then he will go on to Moscow, and then he will go on to Poland, and maybe he'll go on to Kiev. That's my most schizo.
I'm gonna tell you something. I'm so glad you brought this up.
Okay, no, I need the chat in the comments to tell us who has the most schizophrenic take. But GSP,
there are people.
Go on.
There are people who believed that if Prigozhin took over, not only would some of the right-wing units in Ukraine flip sides, but this will have a cascading effect. Russia could lead a revolution that sweeps across Europe.
And base world will be real. Yeah.
I cannot disclose where I heard this for obvious reasons. But that, I'm just thinking like, oh my God, you guys are crazy.
I believe it because I choose to believe it.
I believe it. I want to believe.
I've changed my entire.
I don't have like a. You understand? I have no moral outrage, right? But I just know that's not who these players are.
Oh no, absolutely
and that's not going to happen.
That's.
And Russia's support system would entirely collapse if that happened. I mean, not entirely, but you talk about peeling away certain countries. That's what would happen. And I maybe I'm wrong. But I just cannot see like some countries supporting that. I just don't. Or like what? I mean, okay, that's going to happen. And wait, America wouldn't launch a tactical nuke to see what would happen. I mean, America's kind of desperate right now, right? They need a pretense to enter into Ukraine.
Well,
but
that was
we were
actually
talking about Prigozhin.
I didn't touch on this beginning of the show, but that was actually one of my first thoughts. In the long shot that something like this succeeds and Prigozhin is suddenly in charge of Russian foreign policy, that's World War III. Like, undeniably. That Prigozhin, if we're to take...
Milley said that he was speaking... speaking with Shoigu about the possibility of maybe of a nuclear conflict. Like, they're going to ham that up, right?
Oh, of course.
God, Prigozhin was so close. He was so close.
Yeah, I saw these Ukrainian accounts say that. Or one of the best takes I saw By best I mean one of the by best I mean one of the worst would be that now is the time to give Ukraine ATACMS missiles. So if Prigozhin succeeds in defeating the Russian military, that they could finish the job by launching missiles at Moscow. That was like one Ukrainian.
Yeah, Prigozhin would love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sure that's what would happen.
They literally dream about this, like,
yeah.
And it goes back for decades and decades about burning Moscow down.
Do you remember that like, okay, this guy, he doesn't like me for some reason, but he's CIA kid on YouTube, not YouTube, CIA kids on Twitter. I don't know why. He thinks I'm a coal or whatever. I mean, yeah, I post a lot of coal. But he had this, do you remember this video where they, in the beginning last year, they edited where, can you imagine if the Russians like bombed London and Paris and like Germany, right? And so he like edited the little dark age edit on it where it's like the Russians are like, they use this AI thing to like Russian MiGs are like bombing Paris and London. And so he like put a little dark age edit on it. He's like,
you know what that reminds me of? Do you remember all the way
back? They think with Russia, like that's like Moscow's gonna go up in flames. Yeah, what did you say, Constantine?
You know what that reminds me of?
It's just.
Do you remember all the way back in 2018 when Russia unveiled the so-called Satan missiles? And one of the hypothetical demonstration videos was one of them hitting Mar-a-Lago.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, God. People were already like comparing this to J6, by the way. That Russia had their own J6. Course. Yeah,
it brought back some traumas.
It
reminded me of what could have happened to American democracy that day. And
what if J6? What if the protesters at J6 almost reached Baltimore?
Well, hey, apparently Eric Prince is based, according to the U.S., according to Antifa, like Eric Prince is based in. It'd be like if Eric Prince was like Prigozhin, but like he was an actual far right figure that wanted to take over the U.S. government. Wasn't that a movie? By the way,
it's like a young man syndrome, like this kind of thinking. Honest to God,
sensitive young man syndrome.
Sensitive young man syndrome. Yeah.
No, wasn't that a movie like White House Down, or what was it called? White House Fallen.
Yeah. They made two identical movies like within 6 months of each other. I remember what you're talking about.
It was during the Trump years, so it's like Trump is like a foreign invader in the White House.
A Manchurian candidate.
Yeah, he's a Manchurian. Yeah, he's a Russian Manchurian kid. See, this is what boomer liberals like. This is what they come up with. It's hilarious.
I know, like their lives are so literally boring. My favorite were all those stupid takes by idiots, especially like the perennial idiot for me is Zahan. He is
God, Peter Zion. Oh,
he is such a total. I've never seen like such a total goof. I'll read. Yeah, an attempted coup is in progress in Russia. The mercenary group Wagner, led by a one-time confidant of Vladimir Putin, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is attempting to overthrow the Kremlin. The implications for the Ukraine war are massive. Part 1. What the hell is going on in Ukraine, in Russia and Ukraine? Like
Russia's gone insane.
My Ukrainian friend, like before this whole thing happened, sent me some stuff about like Zahan. Yeah. Like one of the things was Zahan, not all of it. But he brought up something about Russia's in big trouble. They need insurance for their boats. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, and then like, dude, this was already irrelevant a year ago. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I didn't say that. I said this is like, honestly, the profits in the first half of 2023 exceed every profit Russia has had since 2014 in their export. Like, no, it's not making a difference, right? Like, except for the territory that America controls, the world's not going along with them. Okay, like, just get over it.
It's
so sad.
one last question before we go, because it's getting kind of late. I have to
Mhm.
eat. But what is the future of the Frontline going to look like in the next few months in the summer? Do you think
Well,
Krasny Lyman is going to be next, or yeah?
well, I mean, I think you have to look at two things. Of the 12 brigades that Ukraine developed over the last, let's say, 12 months, the ones that were trained NATO, remember the 47th that attacked and got demolished in Zaporozhye. All the rifles were U.S. Everything was U.S. Right? They were outfitted with T-55 tanks that have been modernized to a certain degree, or as much as you can modernize them, including active armor. So these would be better than like what Saddam Hussein had. Of course, the internals were improved, night vision and all that kind of stuff.
A figure trying to find reverse Soviet tank.
The 33, they traded with the 33 Brigade to provide them Leopard tanks.
Yeah.
So I would say this. Weep Union has a short 44-minute video. Like, there are certain channels on Telegram that I consider totally solid, whether they're pro-Russian, neutral, or pro-Ukraine. So for pro-Ukraine, in terms of battlefields, Deep State is accurate. Very little propagandistic editorializing. I don't mean like with their messaging. I mean with like what they show. So the front lines are generally accurate. They admit their losses. Rem Lindy is solid. He would be like the Russian Wagner version. He has contacts in Wagner. Syriac Maps is also very accurate. I've also followed them on Instagram. No, I don't. Sorry, feds. So
we only trust the right people Z in this.
Of course,
no, I'm kidding.
Of course,
I would add one
and History Legend. These are the solid guys, and you should that's like, I do not pay attention to any dissident right person talk about Ukraine. None at all. You know who they are. It doesn't matter whether they're BAP or anti-BAP aligned. I do not pay attention to any of them. The first thing about them is they don't even delve into like the granular details because they don't care. Right? They should, like, when they talk about their domestic stuff, their ideological stuff. Okay, that's fine. I'll listen to that, but I'm not going to name names. I just don't pay attention to anything they have to say.
Yeah, especially
I've
those
even
guys
unfollowed
the War
them.
Yeah, follow the War Report. Oh.
So I don't pay attention to them.
No, but you mean like pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian? You mean dissident right people? Both. Yeah.
I mean dissident right people that were doing dissident right things before the war started. There are certain figures in this movement. We know who they are. Some of them you might be friends with. I have not spoken to them, but I don't listen to anything they say. I don't even follow their channels when it comes to this. So I've given you a selection of accounts. Like, I would say History Legend and Weeb Union are generally very neutral. I don't even follow Dima anymore of Military Summary Channel, because he's just hit and miss. He says he loves to speculate. When you speculate, and you get things wrong too often, like, you have a narrative of what this war is about that isn't accurate, right? It's okay to speculate, but you shouldn't speculate all the time, right? Like, your emotions should not guide you to predicting. Like, your biases, not your emotions. Your biases shouldn't guide you to predicting what will happen necessarily. I know that sounds vague, but I don't pay attention to channels like that. Now, that said, Weeb Union does think that in the north, where Russians have been making gains around Kharkov, but to the far east of that, I don't want to say that they're close to the city or anything. He thinks that is where the greatest potential is. And the reason he does is now with Prigozhin in Belarus, there is a potential as far as they're concerned. And Putin, of course, he met with a military academy that came to visit him. They gave him this aviator watch and everything. He seemed very moved by that. He went and hugged the guy. He was taken like off guard by this. And so he says the Russians are no longer outmanned on the front like the way they were last year. So they have more places where they can reinforce. So losses for them are less of a concern. But now there are more places from where they can attack. So just remember that, and remember that Ukraine still created 12 assault brigades. Only about 3, maybe 4 are heavily attrition. Okay. Yeah. Just remember that. So I don't, obviously the Russians do not want to waste a lot of human life going after like big cities. What they want is for Ukraine to reach a breaking point before they do. That's basically it.
Do you think they could take over Kharkov again or no?
Kharkov?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think they can. I think they can. I don't. Now that is, Putin kind of slyly mentioned it because, he met with these bloggers, including like Gonzo and those guys, and he left. He gave a vague response. We went there once. Should we go again? I don't know. What they want is this thing to, like the apple to fall into their hand, is what I'm saying, right? They believe. I think they believe that Ukraine can snap before the West, before America does, and they must always be prepared for an American NATO intervention if it looks like Ukraine is going to fold. This is why the slow attrition of Ukraine is better, because then they will have to face less. They don't have to face Ukraine and NATO. It's just NATO is always a possibility. Russia understands this. Like these are huge stakes. Even like when the war started, I was mentioning something about, Russia would want these places to fall into their hand. They're not going to go to Lvov. Like I don't know why people say that. People want to believe that, but I don't see the effort. Like for Russia to do that, they have to go on a military economy. They have to radically change things, and I don't see that being the case. Not even now. As far as they're concerned, like the Ukrainian counteroffensive,
total failure
is not. Yeah, is a failure. Now remember, Kherson was a failure for the first 2 weeks as well. However, they had only about 30,000 troops in that region, and the Antonovsky Bridge, was eventually destroyed. Resupplying these troops made it impossible. And of course, now that we saw the destruction of the dam just 2 days after the Ukrainian counteroffensive, we know that they would have been stuck. They would have been surrounded and perished or taken prisoner. It would have been a massive, massive blow. People in November last year many people didn't want to accept that.
They were
There's many Russians who don't want, right? They, like in many ways, like the Russian libs think like becoming an American puppet can only improve life. And the more quote unquote patriotic Russians, who are kind of short-sighted, don't understand the potential of how bad things can get if NATO enters the fight, right? Like, I think the Russian command, its idea is, if we deplete Ukraine in such a way, and the war and the effects of the war that are negative for the West continue, they will be less willing to enter the war. Like, the longer that Russia can show off its staying power, we had a coup attempt and our lines didn't break, is that is the kind of messaging that they're doing for their people, and I think also for the West. So I don't, how does Prigozhin fit into that? I don't know. He may have a role, he may have no role. How much was he aware of what was going on around him when he tried this stunt? I don't know. But like, what he did, in my opinion, is reprehensible. Like,
there was a lot of base Prigozhin being memed though on Twitter,
yeah,
Telegram. So I don't know. Yeah.
But, I know.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be that kind of stuff.
For once, Russian fascists and Western libs agreed.
No, but yeah, in terms of like purely like military, like even another thing we didn't mention once. You mentioned the people you can trust. Of course, you can trust Emil Kozmin in his analysis, but
naturally,
yes,
yeah, right, Constantine. No, but one thing we didn't mention is that even Strelkov came out and said, like, this is bad. This is not good.
Yeah,
for Prigozhin.
Yeah.
So I think like that's indicative of even him saying, like, the uber critic of the Kremlin, even him saying, like, what Prigozhin's doing is actually treason. And it's not good in the middle of a war.
Yes, yes. And that's the other thing, I'm glad you brought up Strelkov. There were some people when this war started, again, in the dissident right, who felt like by citing Strelkov, they had like, their position about how the war is going has been solidified because they're talking to Strelkov. Like, I honestly, like, in these scenarios, even though I respect them for other reasons and for other insights, they're very well read. I always have something to learn, but on this, they're out of their depth. They've never been to Russia. They don't have Russian friends. They can't speak Russian. I can say I can all those things. Speak Russian, not very well, but like,
better than I can.
No. And I've been honestly, I've been following this war probably before they had their first date. So.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being 13 and following the Maidan, and it's ballooned into this program. So I'm not going to claim that the same sort of credentials that my good friend GSP has here, but once again, a lot of people had no idea about this conflict until February 24th, 2022. And I'm not even blaming them for that. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, but fundamentally, your perspective, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, or somewhere in between, is going to be severely hampered if you had no context of this war beforehand, or no context of Ukrainian history.
Especially if you have really strong priors.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, but that's what I mean. Like, the fact that even Strelkov is coming out and saying, like, yeah, this is really bad. Like, what is Prigozhin doing? It's not going to help the war effort. That should tell you something, right? And like, Kadyrov, like, the second this happened, Kadyrov came out and said that this is terrible in the middle of a war effort. Like, let's settle this like men afterwards.
Kadyrov has been very honorable.
Yeah,
he's been very honorable. Like I would say probably close to 1,000 Chechens fought to liberate Mariupol. If not that, maybe 500. Like, that's hugely important, right? And yes, they are Muslim, but they call themselves the Army of Jesus Christ, and they wear sometimes the banners like you don't shit on those people, right?
Well,
Like
again,
Well,
I'll
certainly
say
the
this.
Kremlin doesn't want to
they
shit
had
on
their
those people.
they had their capital city bombed to smithereens by the people that they're helping. You don't shit on them.
I'll say this in a completely value-neutral context. The idea of using colonial auxiliaries is nothing new or nothing unique to the Russians. It's just a
Yeah,
reality of great power politics and the way these wars work.
exactly. I mean,
Right.
yeah, the
I
Kazakhs
mean,
were
Hitler
used by the
used
Tsar.
Bosnians and Albanians, Albanian Muslims and Bosnian Muslims. You know.
Yeah. No, but that's what I mean. Like that, like in terms of just raw geopolitical, like realpolitik. Like, let's put on our Henry Kissinger hat for a moment here. Um, that is a huge asset and ally. The fact that, like, let's face it, those soldiers that are Chechens fighting in Ukraine, their fathers fought against the Russians. Their fathers died against the Russians, and now they're
Right.
probably the most loyal and most feared,
And
feared
there are
soldiers.
Chechens fighting for Ukraine, by the way.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, like I believe one of the commanders that did the Beslan attack is fighting for Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
So no, but I mean, like, in terms of like the Muslim situation, it's not ideal in Russia. I mean, even demographically, that was something I remember Lev always used to love pointing out. Did you know that Putin lets the Muslims, I can't say it on YouTube, do things to Russian women? Like, he used to love pointing that out for some reason. But I mean, when you're in the situation that Putin is in with the war, it's only natural
let
that you're
me
not
let
going to
me
shit on your
explain something,
allies.
okay? Let me explain something.
Yeah.
To contradict Lev a little bit, okay? So I've like I say, I've been to Russia several times and various cities, and I have seen like Russian dudes pick up a work migrant and force him to go like into the police depot. I have been to a police depot in St. Petersburg. Like I'm, I'm just it's tiring dealing with people who don't have experience
Right.
and like just drag. Okay. There was a video that surfaced in Moscow where there was some Muslims that were giving some kids a hard time at a playground in 20 minutes. And I can send you the video. They had 15 of these youths. They were like punched and knocked down to the ground by the cops. All of them arrested, all of them lying face down. Like they do not. Lev can shut up. Lev is a stupid subversive. He's only half Russian. He's the other part. Let's say most of these people around the globe are on the side of Ukraine, but they're not Ukrainians, and they also are a really big part of the Biden
The
administration.
Pale of
No, but it's
Settlement.
very
That's who
funny.
Lev is.
He like loved this cuck fantasy of like Vladimir Putin just lets the Muslims do whatever they want in Russia to Russian women. He
Yeah,
like
right.
I believe the
Oh,
name for
yeah,
that is
yeah.
actually Emmanuel Macron, but no, he's based.
Yeah.
But see, like, the reason I bring this up, not just because we're shitting on someone who fucked me over, but like, no, the reason I bring this up is because it is very funny how when you look at what's happening in the the tragedy that's happening in greater Europe and Western Europe, I mean, who
Misery
is like
loves
doing
company,
this to you?
okay?
If you're European, who is doing this to you? Is it the Russians that are doing this to you?
Well, clearly
when it comes to migrants?
Yep.
Wagner is spurring on the
Wagner,
migrant crisis.
Exactly, right? No, it's your own domestic. It's people like Emmanuel Macron that have been doing this to the French people. It's people like Boris Johnson. And who was before Boris? It's been so long.
Davy Cameron,
Theresa
Theresa
May,
May.
Well, it's always. I mean, let's face it. It's always been the Dark Lord of the Dark Lord of that has been doing that.
I love how AA has completely embraced Tony Blair. There's an unpopular opinion. There's an unpopular opinion where AA says, "I'm going to give you my value-free judgment on this, on Tony Blair," right? And then D comes in, he goes, "Oh, shut up. You've always been on his side. Value free judgment." My brother cracks up every time he hears this.
Yeah. The Dark Lord. But
he just I love
Hero of
I
Albania.
love the chemistry between
Yeah.
D and academic.
Oh, it carries on Twitter. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
No, but like if you wanted to have a value neutral judgment, you would say that like what Tony Blair did was like an evil but monumental task to shape Britain in his image, is like really like to shape British politics forever in his wake, is like that is like one of that, you know what I mean, like by greatness is not like a morally good thing, it's a terrible thing, but it is a great accomplishment. Not to say it like, I mean, I think I wish it wasn't. I think Tony Blair is profoundly evil and his politics are profoundly evil. But in terms of like this heroic feat of like realpolitik, I mean, yeah, I understand where AA is coming from.
Everybody wants to imitate him.
Oh, exactly.
You know, as much as I'd love to continue this discussion, unfortunately, I am out of time. So thank you once again, Gio, for coming on. And if you have any last words, certainly go.
Thank you. My last word would be that I think that as someone who is a part of the right wing in North America, maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm not a part of the right wing. I'm my own person. But as someone who is friends with a lot of these posters and who has certainly been a facet of like the frogs back in the day, and someone who is given to certain flights of fancy in terms of the Russian conflict myself, in recent months, I have sort of really re-examined my own positions, and I have largely come to the conclusion that Goran has, and I will reverberate it, that I think that the punditry is going too far. People are reading into things their own wishes and desires, and they're filtering things through the lens of their own domestic situation here in North America and in Europe. Yes. And I think that, you know, having talked to a lot of people, a fair amount of people that have either been to Russia who are Russian, I think that even myself, even though I may have my own side and whatnot, I think it's pragmatic to look at what's actually happening and to look at things that are realistic and from the perspective of people in Russia and in Kiev, in Moscow and Kiev, and to actually examine what is going on rather than what we wish to happen. That is always more prudent than to like live this like LARP fantasy that, you know, if a rogue PMC head, you know, takes power of a major superpower, a nuclear superpower, then maybe me and, you know, my band of merry men can take, you know, take over the government in the West. So it's like, yeah, you can't import your own like right wing, like Red Dawn fantasy into this where you can like put twigs in your hair and call yourselves the Wolverine. That's a GTA reference, by the way, from Vice City Public Radio. Also like the figure that's one of my favorite lines from The Big Lebowski when he mentioned the tanks that Saddam had was he was like, you know, little Asian man in black pajamas, that's a worthy fucking adversary. Unlike, you know, some figure you're trying to find reverse in a Soviet tank. You know, I love that. That was the best. But yeah, that's my final word. I think that, you know, everyone has to cool it with the punditry, and the memes have been amazing. Particularly like I know Punish Rex on Twitter had these great memes about like Prigozhin, like it was hilarious. One last Twitter reference I will leave you with is Landshark, our good friend Landshark.
Oh, wonderful.
The tweets have been amazing. Like where the official Ukrainian military account tweeted, "We are watching this," and he like posted the photo of the cuck chair in the hotel room. But I don't know why I found this funny, but he quoted like ironic quoting. Not a quote tweet, but he like quoted this ironically, the phrase that Putin is a fearful madman in a bunker hiding. Someone replied to Landshark, said, "Just like my Albanian grandfather, hiding in a bunker, fearful." You know? Fearfully. I thought that was funny because, you know, Huxa with the the bunkers in Albania. So,
You know, I'll send this to the chat so you guys know I'm about to post, but I'm going to end a show with one of my own memes. And in terms of projecting your fantasies onto the Russian-Ukrainian war, I need to. I'll show it to you guys first, and then I'll show it to the audience because I feel like this is a worthy close for something like this. So, okay, so you guys can look at it right there, and I will get it for the audience right here. I'm very proud of this one, and I give everyone license to use this how they see fit.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
You should Photoshop Richard and Anya on there. That'd be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Photoshop like the Chud Jack, like the West has fallen. Then Photoshop Richard and Anya saying the West will never end. He's like, "Your optimisms disgust me."
But that's my general opinion on people projecting their opinion on the situation. Your optimism disgusts me. But thank you once again, Geo, for showing up. It's always a pleasure to have you for these sort of episodes. They write themselves. It saves me so much show prep, you wouldn't believe it.
The memes have been so fresh lately. I just had to come on the War Report. And plus, like, I have no outlet to talk about geopolitics unless I bring someone on Content Minded. And, you know, Prudy always is, like, exhausted from geopolitics with his own show. So the War Report is sort of like my own farm team, if you will.
Yeah, of course. And we're always happy to have you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this
Thank you, everyone.
This episode of the War Report. I'm losing it. I'm like the left. I've gone insane. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of the War Report. We'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.